So hey guys, this is your favorite fictional vortex. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto was the balance devil, a primal fear beyond death, Naruto x Asa, Yoru x Fami. But before we start, remember to subscribe and like this video. Now let's start. Chapter 1. The Stillness in the Storm. The city of Nikko, once a serene jewel nestle, in the mountains of Tochigi Prefecture, was screaming. It was not the unified, defiant cry of a populace facing a common enemy, but a fractured, dissonant chorus of 1,000 individual terrors. The sound was a physical entity, a grinding pressure that vibrated in the bones and settled as a cold, heavy knot in the stomach. Fear had become the local weather, a perpetual storm that had raged for 3 days and 7 hours. And showed no signs of abating. The air itself tasted metallic and sour, thick with the ozone and rot stench of a devil's presence. This was not the sharp, glorious terror of war that Yoru craved, nor the gnawing emptiness of famine that Fami commanded. This was the fear of entropy, the terror of reality itself coming undone at the seams. The culprit was a being the Sir Viving public safety devil hunters had grimly nicknamed, the Glitch Devil. It did not simply destroy, it corrupted the very logic of existence. Concrete high-rises didn't crumble into rubble, they melted into weeping. Dali-esque parodies of architecture, their windows sagging like mournful eyes. Gravity in its immediate vicinity had become a fickle, treacherous suggestion rather than a law. TS of temporal distortion flickered like faulty fluorescent lights, trapping desperate screams in agonizing, repeating loops. The Glitch Devil was a primal fear given form, the fear that the universe was not a well-ordered machine, but a fragile construct poised on the brink of nonsensical collapse. From her precarious perch atop a listing bookstore, its sign now reading, BOKSTRE, in flickering neon. Asa Mitaka felt a tremor of nausea that had nothing to do with the vertigo-inducing slant of her refuge. Below, the street was a canvas of chaos. A squad of devil hunters, their black suits stark against the grayscale ruin, moved with practiced, desperate synergy. Their contracts were powerful, but ill-suited for this fight. The Fox Devil's massive head materialized, chomped at the swirling vortex of unreality that was the Glitch Devil's core, and then recoiled with a howl of conceptual pain, its form flickering as if it might forget its own shape. Useless, a voice hissed in her mind, sharp and contemptuous. It was Yoru, the War Devil, a constant, belligerent tenant in Asa's consciousness. They fight it as if it were a beast of flesh and blood. They are trying to kill a broken equation with knives and curses. Fools. Quote. Asa hugged her knees tighter, the rough fabric of her school uniform a flimsy anchor to the sane world. What do you suggest we do, then? We tried fighting it yesterday. You turned that car into a polearm of vehicular demise, and it just unbecame a weapon the moment it got close. That was a tactical error, not a failure of strategy, Yoru retorted, the defensiveness in her tone sharp enough to cut glass. We simply need a weapon forged from a concept it cannot unravel. Something with more permanence. Like what? Asa asked, her voice a small, weary thing. My guilt-ridden pen, my profound sense of social awkwardness. I don't think the cringe-inducing conversation katana is going to cut it, Yoru. A frustrated silence was her only answer. Asa risked a glance over the edge again. The Glitch Devil was a difficult thing to look at directly. It had no stable form, manifesting as a roiling cloud of pixelated static, fractured light, and impossible geometry. At its heart was a vaguely humanoid silhouette, a darker absence in the visual noise, but it was the effect on its surroundings that truly defined it. A flock of pigeons, caught in its aura, flew in perfect, repeating figure eights, their coo's time stretched into a mournful, electronic drone. A fountain spray had frozen into a jagged sculpture of solid crystal, each droplet hanging in defiance of physics. This was why public safety had failed. How could you kill something that treated reality as a suggestion? They had thrown everything at it, devils of curse, blood, and shadow. All had been neutralized, not with overwhelming force, but with a quiet, insidious unraveling of their core principles. The cursed devil's incantations became gibberish. The blood fiend's crimson whips turned to flavorless, red-tinted water. It was maddening. It was in this maelstrom of screaming physics and existential dread that, 5 blocks away, a man sat reading a book. The cafe was an island of impossible tranquility. Its windows were intact, the glass gleaming under the soft, warm light of an Edison bulb. The air inside was still and smelled faintly of dark roast coffee and old paper. Outside, the world spasmed and shrieked. Inside, there was only the gentle rustle of a turning page and the quiet, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock against the far wall. The clock was the most defiant thing of all. Its hands moved with a serene, unshakable confidence, marking a time that the city outside had clearly lost track of. The man's name was Naruto. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with hair the color of spun gold that seemed to absorb the cafe's light rather than reflect it. His features were starkly beautiful, a harmony of sharp angles and smooth planes that was almost too perfect, too symmetrical. He wore simple, dark clothing, a black turtleneck and tailored trousers, that spoke of a quiet, minimalist elegance. But it was his eyes that were truly captivating. They were the blue of a deep ocean trench, a shade so profound it seemed to hold an entire, silent universe within it. They were eyes that did not see, so much as perceive. He held a worn copy of Masashi's, The Book of Five Rings. His focus was absolute, his posture relaxed but poised. A half-empty cup of black coffee sat on the small, marble-topped table before him, its surface a perfect, undisturbed mirror reflecting the warm light above. Not a single ripple marred its surface, despite the city-shaking tremors that periodically rattled the teeth of everyone else in a 10-kilometer radius. The chaos simply stopped at the cafe's door. It was not repelled by a visible barrier or a shimmering shield of energy. It was more as if the fundamental rules that governed the space within the cafe had lightly declined to participate in the pandemonium raging without. A young waitress, her face pale and etched with sleepless fear, approached his table. She had been trapped here with him since the devil's manifestation. In the first few hours, she had been hysterical. Now, a strange, numbing calm had settled over her, a peace that emanated from her soul customer-like warmth from a hearth. "Anyo, sir," she stammered, wringing a damp cloth in her hands. Another big one just hit. The building across the street it's crying." Naruto did not look up from his book. He turned a page, the crisp sound abnormally loud in the quiet room. The building is experiencing a structural and material phase shift, manifesting as a viscous, saline liquid. It is not an emotional response. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, smooth and even, utterly devoid of inflection or emotion. It was not cold or robotic, but rather possessed a quality of profound, unshakable certainty, as if he were stating a fundamental truth of the cosmos. "All right," the waitress said, looking out the window at the weeping skyscraper. Will we be all right in here? This space is in equilibrium," Naruto stated, his gaze still fixed on the text. "It is balanced. The chaos outside is a state of extreme imbalance. The two cannot coexist in the same conceptual space. Therefore, we are all right," he said it with the same simple finality one might use to state that 1 + 1 = 2. The waitress nodded, not because she understood the mechanics of it, but because listening to him speak made the concept of danger feel distant and abstract. She retreated behind the counter, her gaze fixed on him, this anchor of stillness in a world gone mad. Naruto read on. "In strategy, it is important to see distant things as if they were close and to take a distanced view of close things." He paused, his deep blue eyes lifting from the page for the first time, not to look at the waitress or the weeping building, but through the wall. Through the 5 blocks of distorted reality, to the heart of the storm. A flicker of something, not annoyance, not concern, but perhaps a detached sense of impatience, crossed his features for a barest fraction of a second. The imbalance was growing. It was becoming inefficient. "We have to move, Asa." Yoru's voice was a drill sergeant's bark in her skull. "The hunters are pulling back. They're going to cordon the area and wait for one of the big guns from Tokyo. We'll be trapped in here with that thing." Asa scrambled down from the bookstore's roof, landing with a jarring thud in a back alley littered with distorted refuse. A bicycle was twisted into a perfect spiral, and a trash can had its lid and bottom fused together, its contents trapped in a non-Euclidean prison. "Where do we go? Every direction is just more of that." "There is a subway entrance 3 blocks east," Yoru commanded. "The underground tunnels should be shielded from the worst of its spatial warping." We can navigate from there. Asa hated the subway. The stale air, the oppressive closeness, the ghosts of 1,000 hurried, miserable commutes. But it was better than the alternative. She broke into a run. Her breath catching in her throat, her lungs burning with the foul air. The world around her was a nightmare. The sound of a car horn became a physical force, a battering ram pure sound that threw her against a wall. She scrambled up, her ears ringing, and saw the source. A taxi, its yellow paint flickering between hues of sickening purple and green, its horn blaring a continuous, weaponized shriek. It was then that the glitch devil truly noticed her. Perhaps it was the spark of Yoru's presence within her, a different kind of anomaly in its field of chaos. The Royalin G-cloud of static on the main thoroughfare swiveled. The humanoid absence at its core seemed to fix its non-gaze upon her. A new kind of fear, colder and more personal than the ambient dread, lanced through Asa. The world tilted. The alleyway stretched, the mouth of it receding into an impossible distance, like a dolly zoom in a horror movie. The ground beneath her feet softened, turning to a thick, viscous mud that clung to her ankles. Trapping her. Yoru, she screamed, her voice sounding thin and distant. It has us. Yoru snarled, a wave of frustrated fury washing through their shared mind. It's trying to derez us. Fight it. Think of something strong. Something real. Asa's mind raced in panic. What was real? Her name. Her school. Her crippling debt. The devil's influence was like a pressure on her very soul, squeezing out the details, trying to reduce her to a single, corrupted line of code. She felt her memories begin to fray at the edges. The face of her mother, the smell of her childhood home, they were becoming fuzzy, indistinct. In a desperate act of mental defiance, she focused on the single most potent, tangible thing in her life, her guilt over killing her class president, Bucky. The memory was sharp, horrific, and agonizingly real. The feel of the chicken's body, the squawk, the shame. For a moment, it worked. The pressure receded slightly. She could feel her legs again. The glitch devil seemed to ponder this. It processed the input, and then it adapted. The viscous mud around her feet began to squawk. The sound was horrifying, a chorus of 1,000 dying chickens. The mud reshaped itself, forming into small, writhing, feathered forms that pecked and clawed at her legs. Bucky's name was scrawled across the walls of the alley, the letters glitching and reforming, dripping a foul, black ichor. No, Asa whimpered, falling to her knees, the sensory and psychological assault overwhelming her. This was a new level of cruelty. It wasn't just attacking reality anymore. It was attacking her reality. Asa, get up. Asa. Yoru's voice was fading, as if the connection between them was being stretched thin. Don't let it win. We need a weapon. Give me that guilt. Give me the chicken. But Asa was lost. The world was dissolving into a personalized hell of shame and squawking. She was going to die here, drowned in an ocean of her own worst memory, another forgotten casualty in a bizarre, meaningless tragedy. She closed her eyes, waiting for the final corruption, the moment when she would be completely and utterly unmade. And then, silence. It was not a gradual fading of sound. It was instantaneous. One moment, the world was a cacophony of dying chickens and conceptual decay. The next, there was a profound, absolute stillness. The pressure on her mind vanished. The squawking ceased. The gripping mud became solid, inert concrete. Asa opened her eyes, trembling. Standing at the mouth of the alley, between her and the glitch devil, was the man from the cafe. Naruto had not walked from the cafe to the alley. He had simply arrived. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his posture unchanged, his expression as placid and unreadable as a deep lake at midnight. The chaotic aura of the glitch devil, which had been warping a 10-block radius, now seemed to break against his presence like waves against a stone cliff. The area around him was a perfect circle of normalcy. An eye in the hurricane of madness. The glitch devil reacted. It pulsed, its static form roiling with what could only be described as fury. It threw a wave of pure distortion at Naruto. A visual screech of broken physics designed to unmake matter and mind. Naruto watched it come. He did not brace himself. He did not raise a hand. He did not even blink. The wave of chaos washed over him and vanished. It did not impact. It did not dissipate. It was simply gone, absorbed into the stillness he projected. It was like shouting into a vacuum. He took a step forward. The ground beneath his foot, previously part of the warped and shrieking street, became solid, silent pavement. He took another step, and another, walking out of the alley and into the main thoroughfare, directly towards the devil. With each step, the zone of absolute normality expanded around him, overriding the glitch devil's influence. The weeping skyscraper stopped crying, its liquid facade solidifying into a bizarre, permanent sculpture of sorrow. The taxi's color-shifting paint settled on a flat, matte yellow, its weaponized horn falling silent. The pigeons, freed from their temporal loop, addered into the sky with a panicked flutter of wings. Asa watched, breathless, from the alley. Yoru was utterly silent in her mind, a state so unusual it was more alarming than her usual tirades. It was the silence of pure, unadulterated shock. The glitch devil, for the first time, seemed to know fear. It was not the fear of being destroyed, but the fear of being negated. It recoiled, its form compressing, the static crackling with panicked energy. It threw everything it had at the approaching figure. It bent space, trying to fold the distance between them so Naruto would be inside it. The space around Naruto refused to bend. It tried to erase the concept of walking, but Naruto's legs continued to move. It tried to flood his mind with existential paradoxes, but his mind was a fortress of perfect, placid equilibrium. He stopped about 10 feet from its core. He tilted his head slightly, his deep blue eyes gazing into the swirling vortex of unreality. He finally removed one hand from his pocket. He did not form a sign or gather energy. He simply raised it, palm open, in a gesture that was not threatening, but rather, presentational. The nature of a glitch is that it is an error in a system, Naruto said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the residual hum of the city with absolute clarity. It was the first time he had spoken outside the cafe, and the sound of it made the very air feel solid and stable. It is a deviation from the intended state, an imbalance. He looked at the roiling mass of chaos. The solution is not to introduce more variables. It is not to fight error with opposing error. That only creates more chaos. The glitch devil let out a silent, visual scream, a blast of pure corruption aimed directly at his face. It was the concentrated essence of its being. Naruto's expression did not change. The solution, he continued, as the wave of unmaking washed over him and ceased to exist, is to restore the system to its intended state. To zero, to balance. And then, he closed his hand into a gentle fist. It was the most terrifying event Asa Mitaka had ever witnessed. The glitch devil did not explode. It did not scream. It did not dissolve. It stopped. The swirling vortex of static froze mid-crackle. The impossible geometry locked into place. The dark, humanoid absence at its core became solid. The entire 10-block radius of distorted reality snapped back into alignment in a single, silent instant. It was like a city-sized machine that had been shaking itself to pieces suddenly being switched off. The silence that descended was absolute and heavy, a smothering blanket of pure nullity. Then, the now frozen form of the glitch devil began to change. The chaotic lines and pixelated noise resolved themselves. The form contracted, folding in on itself in a display of silent, perfect cosmic origami. The impossible angles became clean, symmetrical lines. The jarring colors bled away into a single, uniform shade of obsidian black. The process took perhaps 5 seconds. And when it was finished, the devil that had held a city hostage was gone. In its place, hovering in the air exactly where its core had been, was a perfect sphere. It was about the size of a bowling ball, its surface so black it seemed to drink the light, so smooth it had no reflection. It was an object of absolute, featureless perfection. It radiated nothing. No heat, no energy, no aura. It was simply there. A point of perfect material balance. The sphere hung in the air for a moment longer, and then, with a soft, final click that was somehow the loudest sound Asa had ever heard, it dropped to the pavement. It did not bounce. It did not crack. It landed with the dead, absolute finality of a forgotten truth. Naruto looked at the sphere, then lowered his hand and returned it to his pocket. He turned his head, his impossibly blue eyes landing on Asa, who was still kneeling in the alleyway. His gaze was not warm, nor was it cold. It was like being observed by a law of nature. A dispassionate, analytical force. It was Yoru who broke the silence, her voice a strangled whisper in Asa's mind, filled with an emotion Asa had never heard from her before, a deep, primal awe that bordered on terror. What in all the hells, are you? Asa, finding her own voice, pushed herself to her feet, stumbling out of the alley. The surviving devil hunters were emerging from their cover, their faces masks of stunned disbelief, staring at the inert sphere on the ground. But Asa only had eyes for the man in black. You, who are you? She called out, her voice trembling but defiant. What did you do? Naruto regarded her for a long moment. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. When he finally spoke, his voice was the calm center of a world that had just finished screaming. My name is Naruto, he said, as if the name itself should be explanation enough. As for what I did, I corrected an error. I saw an imbalance, and I restored equilibrium. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The struggle has ceased. The system is stable. My work here is done. He turned to leave, his movements fluid and unhurried. Wait, Asa shouted, a surge of Audrey. The line and 1,000 unanswered questions propelling her forward. Yoru was screaming in her head now, a torrent of commands and frantic theories. Stop him. A power like that, he could kill Chainsaw Man. He could kill Me. Is he a devil? A fiend? What is his fear? Naruto paused, his back still to her. Fear? He asked, a hint of something new in his tone, not emotion, but a deep, philosophical curiosity. He turned his head slightly, his profile sharp against the bruised twilight sky. Fear is born from the possibility of a negative outcome. Fear of death, of pain, of loss. Fear is a product of struggle. It is a symptom of imbalance. His gaze seemed to pierce through Asa, through Yoru, into the very core of their warring natures. I am not a product of such things. Beings like you, born of war and chaos. You seek to create fear. Others, like the one that is now, resolved, are fear incarnate. You are all part of the same chaotic equation. The struggle. He finally turned to face them fully, his blue eyes holding them captive. But what happens when the struggle itself is the enemy? What is the fear of the final, perfect, immutable answer? The fear of the end of all questions, all conflict, all change. What is the terror of a world in perfect, unshakable, eternal balance? He offered no answer, only the question. He let it hang in the silent, ruined street, a concept more vast and terrifying than any devil they had ever encountered. The fear of stillness. The fear of the end. With a final, placid glance, Naruto turned and walked away, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Of the ruined city as seamlessly as he had appeared. He left behind a silent sphere of perfect black, a squad of dumbfounded devil hunters, and a teenage girl sharing her body with the war devil, Bo. Each of whom were grappling with the chilling realization that they had just met a power that did not exist on their spectrum. He was not chaos, and he was not order. He was the point where both ceased to matter. He was the balanced devil. Asa stared at the black sphere on the pavement, a tangible piece of nothingness. For the first time, Yoru's usually belligerent and confident presence in her mind felt small, and very, very quiet. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Weight of Want. The silence left behind in Nico was a scar. In the week that followed the sphering of the glitch devil, a new kind of fear settled over the city, the quiet, unnerving fear of the unknown. Public safety had quarantined the 10-block radius, not because of any lingering danger, but because of the profound lack of it. The area was too perfect, too stable. Scientists in hazmat suits took readings that yielded nothing. Geiger's counters were silent. Spectral analysis showed air. Just air. At the center of it all, resting on the pristine pavement, was the black sphere. It defied every attempt at analysis. It had no temperature, reflecting the ambient air to a perfect thousandth of a degree. It had mass, yet resist. Being moved with a stubborn inertia that seemed to defy the laws of physics. It was a black hole of information, a question mark given physical form. Asa Mitaka sat in a sterile, white debriefing room in a Tokyo public safety facility. A cup of lukewarm tea growing cold in her hands. Across the brushed steel table, a man with tired eyes and a drooping mustache, Section Chief Ryota, sighed for what felt like the 100th time. He tapped a thick file filled with her testimony, a document riddled with inconsistencies and evasions. Mitaka-san, he said, his voice raspy from too many cigarettes and too much shouting. Let's go over it one more time. You state that you were cornered by the target. You felt your consciousness fraying. Then a man appeared. Yes, Asa said, her voice flat. She had been practicing this flat, unhelpful tone. A man in a black turtleneck. With blonde hair and blue eyes. Yes, and he simply closed his hand. Yes, and the primal level threat that had neutralized 3 of our special fiends and was actively rewriting the local laws of physics, turned into a bowling ball. I believe it's a perfect sphere. Bowling balls have holes, Asa corrected, earning a glare. Of course. My apologies for the inaccuracy, Ryota said, the sarcasm dripping from his words. And this man, this, Naruto, he said he was restoring equilibrium. Something like that, Asa mumbled, staring into her tea. This is useless, Yoru seethed in the private theater of her mind. The war devil was pacing, a caged tiger of pure fury and frustration. Why are you protecting him? We should tell them everything. An entity with that level of conceptual power is a threat to my entire existence. To our goal, he could balance war. Imagine a world without conflict, Asa. Not a world of peace, but a world of utter, stagnant neutrality. It's the most horrifying thought I've ever had. Asa took a slow sip of the foul tea. And what would we tell them? She thought back, her internal voice weary. That a godlike being who can turn chaos into a paperweight showed up, said some cryptic things, and then left. They already don't believe me. They think I'm hallucinating or covering for some unknown devil contract. Telling them the full, insane truth would get me locked in a padded room for the rest of my life. We have no record of any devil, fiend, or hybrid with the name Naruto, Ryota continued, rubbing his temples. No reports of contracts matching this description. The power you describe, it's not destructive. It's not creative. It's reductive. It's a power of negation on a level we've never encountered. It's of immense interest to us, Mitaka-san. And your failure to cooperate is beginning to look less like trauma and more like complicity. The threat hung in the air, thick and unpleasant. Asa's stomach churned. She was a bad liar, and she knew it. The only thing saving her was that the truth was so much more unbelievable than any lie she could concoct. He didn't feel like a devil, Asa thought. A flicker of the memory crossing her mind. The memory of the silence that had descended on the alley. It wasn't the empty silence of a vacuum, but a silence that felt full. A silence that was a presence in and of itself. It was the most peaceful she had felt in years, and that fact terrified her more than any of the glitch devil's horrors. It was the peace of a corpse, the tranquility of a stone. A world without struggle. I'm telling you what I saw, she said, her voice a little stronger. I can't explain it. I don't know who he was. Yoru scoffed. Liar. You're not protecting him. You're protecting that feeling. That disgusting, placid, nothingness. It felt good to you, didn't it? To have the chaos just stop. Shut up, Yoru. The debriefing ended, as the previous 3 had. In a stalemate, Asa was released but assigned a low-level surveillance detail. 2 young devil hunters who tried to be subtle but shadowed her with all the grace of a pair of refrigerators. Her life resumed its painful charade of normalcy. She went to school. She ignored the whispers of her classmates. She ate her lunch alone on the roof. But everything was different. The world felt flimsy. She kept expecting the edges of buildings to pixelate, or for the chatter of the schoolyard to stretch into a distorted drone. The encounter with the glitch devil had damaged her faith in reality. But the encounter with Naruto had shattered it completely. Yoru was no help. The war devil had become obsessed, a scholar of a single, terrifying data point. In the quiet of their small apartment, she would force Asa to replay the memory of Naruto's arrival over and over again. Look, Yoru would command, as the mental image of Naruto walking through the storm of chaos played out. There's no energy fluctuation, no incantation, no summoning. He isn't imposing his will on reality. He is a state of reality that is simply overriding the other one. He's not a weapon, Asa. He's a universal constant. How do you fight gravity? How do you wage war on mathematics? This new, quasi-philosophical Yoru was almost more unnerving than the belligerent one. The war devil, a being of pure, violent conviction, was wrestling with a concept that threatened her very identity. If war was a struggle, what was the opposite? Peace. No. Yoru understood peace. It was merely the fallow ground where future wars were sown. The opposite of her was resolution. Finality. The end of the argument. It was during one of these late-night obsession sessions, 2 weeks after Nico, that a new piece of information broke the monotony. A news report flickered on the small television in the corner of Ace's room, a brief segment on the national broadcast that most would have ignored. Unprecedented. Agricultural crisis continues to unfold in the Tokachi subprefecture of Hokkaido, the announcer said, her voice professionally grave. Reports describe a mysterious blight affecting nearly 70% of all crops. While the produce appears healthy, extensive testing has revealed it possesses virtually no nutritional value. Locals are calling it the empty crop blight, and despite government aid, a state of emergency is imminent as local food stores are rapidly depleting. The report cut to a shot of a vast field of corn. The stalks were tall, the leaves a vibrant green, the ears of corn plump and golden. It looked like a postcard for agricultural success. Then, the camera zoomed in on a farmer, a man with skin weathered like old leather, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow with a despair that was chillingly familiar. He was shucking one of the perfect-looking ears of corn and eating the kernels raw, his jaw working mechanically, his expression one of utter, vacant misery. Stop, Yoru whispered in Ace's mind. The single word was sharp, electric. Rewind that. Asa fumbled for the remote, her heart suddenly beating faster. She rewound the clip and played it again, this time focusing on the farmer's face. It wasn't just hunger. It was something deeper, a hollowness that seemed to radiate from his very soul. That's not a curse, Yoru said, her voice low and tense with a dawning, horrified realization. Curses cause rot, disease, pestilence. They are forces of decay. This is something else. This is a corruption of a concept. The concept of sustenance. What are you saying? Asa asked aloud, her voice a whisper. A power that operates on that level. A power that can target not the food, but the very meaning of food. Yoru's mental voice trailed off, and then returned with a terrifying certainty. This is the work of a primal. Or something close to it. We have to go there. To Hokkaido. Are you insane? We're being watched. We have no money. And why would we go charging into another disaster zone? We barely survived the last one. Because, you idiot, Yoru snarled, her old fire returning, a power of this magnitude will attract other powers. If we want to find Chainsaw Man, if we want to reclaim my power, we need to be where the real game is played. And more importantly, if a being like this exists, I want to see if your balanced devil shows up to put it in a box. This is an imbalance on a massive scale. It's a test case, Asa. We need to see how he reacts. The logic was twisted, but it was logic nonetheless. Asa looked from the gaunt face of the farmer on the screen to the drab walls of her tiny apartment. Her life was a cage, and the bars were made of fear and mediocrity. The man named Naruto had shown her a world beyond that cage, a world of terrifying, cosmic forces. It was a world that could unmake her in an instant, but it was also the only place where she had felt something other than crippling anxiety. She thought of the stillness. The perfect, terrifying peace. How? She asked, the single word of concession hanging in the air. Yoru's presence in her mind felt like a predator's smile. Leave that to me. 3 days later, Asa Mitaka was on a ferry heading north. The salty, cold spray of the Tsugaru Strait misting her face. Yoru had been brutally efficient. A persuasive conversation, with a local loan shark involving a lamppost temporarily converted into a streetlight spine cracker, had secured them the necessary funds. Evading their surveillance detail had been a simple matter of causing a minor panic at a End station. A flock of pigeons turned into feathered daggers of distraction. Now, they were anonymous passengers on a slow boat to hell, or as the brochure called it, Hokkaido. As she leaned on the railing, watching the gray, churning water, Asa felt a familiar knot of anxiety. But beneath it, there was something else. A flicker of anticipation. Yoru was right. This was a test case. And she found herself desperately, terrifyingly curious about the result. The port of Tomakomai was gray. The sky, the sea, the concrete docks, all shared the same shade of weary, washed-out gray. The air, however, was what struck Asa first. It carried the usual scents of salt and diesel, but underneath was a strange, sweet, cloying odor. The smell of rot, but a clean, sterile rot, like fruit that had gone bad without ever breaking the skin. They took a bus inland, into the heart of the Tokachi Plains. And there, the true nature of the blight revealed itself. It was a landscape painting from which the East had meticulously erased the concept of life, while leaving the image perfectly intact. The fields stretched to the horizon, a rolling sea of green and gold. Wheat stalks stood tall and proud, their heads heavy. Potato plants were lush and verdant. Vast fields of soybeans showed no sign of pest or disease. By all visual metrics, this was a land of impossible bounty. But the silence was wrong. There were no birds singing in the trees. No insects droning in the air. The farmhouses they passed were shuttered and still, with an air of abandonment, even though thin plumes of smoke rose from their chimneys. They got off the bus in a small farming town called Otofuk. The main street was deserted. A restaurant had a sign in the window, written in a shaky hand, all you can eat -500 yen. It seemed less like a bargain and more like a desperate plea. I can feel it, Yoru whispered. The weakness, the need, it's like the air itself is hungry. They passed a grocery store. The doors were wide open. Inside, the shelves were packed with perfect-looking vegetables, gleaming fruits, and pristine packages of meat. A gaunt-faced woman sat behind the counter, staring blankly at the bounty, not even trying to entice them to buy. There was no point. The food was worthless. Asa's own stomach rumbled, a normal, human hunger. They hadn't eaten since the ferry. They entered the store, and Asa picked up a perfect, red apple. It felt right. It smelled right. She bit into it. The texture was crisp, the flesh juicy. But the taste? There was no taste. It was like chewing on solidified water. Her mouth registered the physical sensation of eating, her stomach the volume of the matter entering it, but the fundamental signal, the chemical and psychological message that said, this is food. This will sustain you, was completely absent. She swallowed the mouthful of nothing and felt fuller, but not sated. The hunger pang in her gut remained, a dull, hollow ache, now mockingly juxtaposed with the physical sensation of a full stomach. See, Yoru's voice was grim. It's a lie, a beautiful, perfect lie. Asa put the apple down, a wave of nausea washing over her. She looked at the woman behind the counter, whose ribs were starkly visible beneath her thin shirt. The woman's gaze was fixed on a small, portable TV on the counter, where a cooking show was displaying a lavish, steaming bowl of ramen. The woman was weeping silently, tears tracking paths through the dust on her hollow cheeks. They spent the day walking through the town, a pair of ghosts in a living museum of despair. The horror of the place was its subtlety. There were no monsters roaming the streets, no blood on the walls. There was only this quiet, creeping, all-consuming emptiness. They saw families sitting around tables laden with magnificent feasts, eating mechanically, their eyes as vacant as the food they consumed. They were starving to death in a land of plenty. The psychological toll was immense. People were not just hungry. They were being driven mad by the constant, unfulfilled promise of satisfaction. In the late afternoon, they found themselves at the edge of a vast cornfield. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the golden stalks in hues of orange and blood red. It was beautiful, and the beauty made it all the more grotesque. Whatever is causing this, it's not a mindless beast, Asa said, her arms wrapped around herself. This is deliberate, it's artful, it is a statement, Yoru corrected. And it is the work of my sister. Asa turned. Sister. A figure of speech, Yoru clarified, though her tone suggested otherwise. The one who embodies the fear of famine. I can feel her signature on this place. Faint, arrogant, she is enjoying this. It is a grand performance. As they stood there, a figure emerged from between the rows of corn. It was a young woman, perhaps their age, with long, dark hair tied into two loose braids. She wore a simple, elegant dress that seemed out of place in the rustic setting and a distinctive earring shaped like a scale. Her most striking feature was her eyes, which were a swirling pattern of concentric circles, like the rings of a very old tree. She moved with a languid, unhurried grace, holding a half-eaten ear of perfect, golden corn in her hand. She was the only person Asa had seen here who did not look gaunt or desperate. In fact, She looked perfectly, blissfully content. She stopped a few feet away from them, taking a delicate bite of the tasteless corn. She chewed thoughtfully, a small, serene smile playing on her lips. "Isn't it wonderful?" she asked, her voice light and melodic, like the chiming of a tiny, distant bell. "To be so full, yet so empty. It's the essential tragedy of existence, don't you think? To always want." Yoru went rigid in Asa's mind. Fami, the famine devil, one of the four horsemen. Asa's blood ran cold. She was standing face to face with a being whose very concept could starve nations. Fami's ringed eyes settled on Asa. But they seemed to look right through her, focusing on the passenger in her soul. "Oh, little sister," she chirped, her smile widening. "Look at you, reduced to sharing a body with a human. How quaint, how pitiable. Did Chainsaw Man do that to you? He's so dreadfully messy." "Fami," Yoru snarled, speaking through Asa's mouth. The voice was a low, dangerous growl, a stark contrast to Fami's musical tone. "What is this farce? Are you so weak you can only play with farmers and their crops?" Fami giggled, a sound that was both charming and deeply unsettling. "Weak? My dear Yoru, this isn't about strength. It's about philosophy. I am making a point. All of life's struggles, from the pining of a lover to the ambition of a king, are just different flavors of hunger. The desire for a thing is the root of all suffering. So, I thought, why not conduct an experiment? A world with all the objects of desire, but none of the satisfaction. A world of pure, undiluted want. Isn't it a masterpiece of misery?" She gestured with her corncob to the silent, starving landscape. It was clear she was immensely proud of her work. She was not just a devil, she was an artist, and this was her magnum opus. Asa felt a surge of revulsion. This wasn't a disaster, it was a thesis statement written in human suffering. But before Yoru could spit another insult, another presence made itself known. It wasn't a sound or a sight. It was a change in the air. A subtle shift in the fundamental pressure of the world. The cloying sweetness of the sterile rot seemed to thin. The oppressive aura of want lessened its grip. Not because it was pushed away, but because it was counterweighted. Both Fami and Yoru fell silent. Fami's serene smile faltered for the briefest of moments, replaced by a look of intense curiosity. She turned her head, her ringed gaze sweeping across the field. A man was walking down the dirt path that bordered the cornfield. He wore a simple black turtleneck and tailored trousers, his hands tucked into his pockets. His golden hair seemed to catch the last rays of the setting sun, creating a halo effect that was both angelic and deeply unnatural. It was Naruto. He did not seem to be heading for them, or for any particular destination. He was simply walking, his pace even and unhurried. He paused, not far from them, and reached out to touch a leaf on a stalk of corn. He ran his fingers along its edge, his expression one of detached, analytical study. He radiated an aura of such profound stillness, such absolute lack of need or want, that in this land of insatiable hunger, he was the ultimate anomaly. He was a perfect zero in a world of negative numbers. Fami's eyes, which had looked upon her starving subjects with amused detachment, now fixed on Naruto with a hungry intensity that was startling. It was the look of a master mathematician who has just stumbled upon a beautiful, impossible equation. "Well now," she breathed, her voice a low, excited whisper. "What is this? He doesn't hunger. He doesn't want. He doesn't even exist in the same way. He's a walking refutation." She forgot all about Asa and Yoru. All her attention, all her immense, terrifying focus, was now on the man in black. With the same languid grace as before, she began to walk towards him, tossing the half-eaten, tasteless corncob aside. Asa stood frozen, Yoru's stunned silence echoing in her own. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The players were assembling. The artist of starvation was about to meet the avatar of stillness. This was why they had come. The test case was about to begin. Naruto ran his thumb over the surface of the corn leaf. He could feel the imbalance on a conceptual level. It was a fascinating, intricate piece of work. The plant was physically perfect, a model of biological efficiency. It photosynthesized, it drew water, it produced glucose. But the very concept of nourishment, the metaphysical property that transformed mere matter into sustenance, had been surgically excised. It was like a perfectly written book whose letters contained no meaning. An elegant, cruel, and deeply unstable equation. He had been drawn here by the sheer scale of it, a weight on the cosmic scales that was pulling an entire region of the planet down into a state of negative satisfaction. It was an imbalance that demanded his attention. It's a lovely evening for a stroll, isn't it? The voice was melodic and light. He turned his head. The girl with the ringed eyes and the scale-shaped earring was approaching him. He recognized the signature instantly. One of the four, famine. Her presence was a vortex of want, a constant, subtle pull on the world around her, drawing everything towards a state of emptiness. Yet, as she drew closer, her own aura seemed to ripple. Disturbed by his placid field of equilibrium, it was like watching smoke encounter a pane of glass. The statement of purpose is clear, Naruto said, his voice as even as the horizon. He did not acknowledge her greeting, instead cutting directly to the core of the matter. To demonstrate that desire is the root of suffering by creating a system of infinite, unfulfillable desire. Fami's smile was radiant. She stopped before him, clasping her hands behind her back in a gesture of girlish innocence that was completely at odds with the ancient, cosmic hunger in her eyes. You understand. I'm so glad. Most people just see the starving farmers. They miss the poetry. I am Fami. It's a pleasure to finally meet a being who can appreciate the finer points of conceptual art. My name is Naruto, he replied, his gaze unwavering. This is not art. It is an inefficient system. You have created a positive feedback loop of negative fulfillment, which will inevitably lead to systemic collapse. It is unstable. Fami's head tilted, her braids swaying. Oh, but collapse is part of the beauty. The final, desperate gasp of a world that wants, and wants, and wants, and then, is no more. It's the ultimate punchline. But you are the exception. You don't want anything, do you? I can feel it. It's quiet inside you. There's no gnawing, no ache. What is it like? Her question was not rhetorical. It was one of genuine, burning, academic curiosity. She was a being defined by hunger, and she had just met a being who seemed to have no capacity for it. From a safe distance, hidden amongst the corn, Asa and Yoru watched. Silent witnesses. She's talking to him like he's a science experiment, Asa thought, a shiver running down her spine. They are talking about us like we're ants, Yoru corrected, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and awe. Listen. Just listen. Balance is not the absence of want, Naruto stated, ignoring Fami's question about his internal state. It is the equilibrium between want and fulfillment. The dynamic tension between the two is what drives a system forward. You have removed one half of the equation, and replaced it with poetry. Fami countered cheerfully. Why have a boring, functional system when you can have a beautiful tragedy? Isn't ultimate, unending desire a more interesting state than bland, temporary satisfaction? Naruto's expression remained unchanged, but there was a finality in his tone that silenced the fields. The experiment is over. The inefficiency must be corrected. Fami's smile did not falter, but her eyes narrowed slightly, the rings within them seeming to spin faster. Oh, and how do you propose to do that? Will you kill me? Many have tried. It's terribly difficult to kill a concept, especially one as fundamental as hunger. She paused, then gestured to the fields. Or perhaps you mean to destroy my little catalyst. As she spoke, a small, wretched creature materialized from the shadows behind her. It looked like a starved, hairless monkey with a mouth that was a gaping, toothless hole. Its eyes were wide with a kind of desperate pleading. This was Fami's pet, the devil that fed on satisfaction. It shivered in Naruto's presence, sensing the profound threat he represented. Destroying the catalyst is also inefficient, Naruto said. It would leave a void. The system requires a replacement variable, not a deletion. He raised a hand, much as he had in Nico. It was a simple, open-palmed gesture. Not of aggression, but of intention. You have removed the concept of satisfaction, he stated. I will not restore it. That would merely return the system to its prior, flawed state of oscillation. Instead, I will introduce a new, balancing principle. Fami watched, her head tilted, her curiosity overriding any sense of alarm. She was witnessing something new, and to a being as old as her, novelty was the most precious commodity in the universe. Naruto closed his eyes for a single second. When he opened them, the deep blue seemed to have become infinite. He did not target Fami. He did not target the satisfaction-eating devil. He targeted the entire Tokachi subprefecture. A wave of something washed over the land. It was not energy. It was not light. It was a wave of pure, conceptual information. Asa felt it pass over her, a strange, clinical sensation, like having her soul painlessly audited by a divine accountant. In the town, the gaunt woman weeping in front of the cooking show suddenly stopped. Her tears dried. The gnawing ache in her gut, the hunger that had been her constant companion for weeks, vanished. Not replaced by fullness, but simply gone. She looked at the steaming ramen on the TV, and for the first time, she felt nothing. No desire, no longing. It was just an image. She blinked, a profound confusion on her face, and then, with a shrug, she turned the television off. In a farmhouse, a family sitting around a table laden with a tasteless feast paused mid-chew. The father looked at the roast chicken. Then at his wife. The desperate need that had driven them to eat constantly was gone. He no longer felt hungry. He no longer felt anything about the food. He put his fork down. The struggle was over. Across hundreds of square kilometers, the great, screaming, psychic wound of mass hunger was healed in an instant. But it was not a joyful healing. Asa felt her own normal, human hunger pang disappear. She also felt the sudden, complete absence of any desire to eat. The thought of a warm meal, which had been a comforting fantasy moments before, now held no appeal whatsoever. It was an emotionally neutral concept. Fami's smile finally, completely, vanished. She looked around, her ringed eyes wide. She could feel it. Her great symphony of suffering had been silenced. The want was gone. But it had not been replaced by satisfaction. It had been replaced by nothing. What did you do? She whispered, her voice losing its melodic quality for the first time. I have balanced the equation, Naruto said, his hand still raised. The biological need for caloric and nutritional intake remains. The food will now provide those things in a perfectly efficient transfer. But I have severed the connection between that biological process and the neurological concept of pleasure, or satisfaction. Hunger is gone, but so is the joy of sating it. Want has been removed, but so has fulfillment. They eat to live. The process is now purely functional, efficient, balanced. He had not restored what Fami had taken. He had balanced its absence by removing its counterpart. He had solved the problem of starvation by making eating a tasteless, joyless, mechanical act of fueling the body. He had cured the disease by killing the patient's soul. Asa felt a wave of horror so profound it almost buckled her knees. This was 1,000 times more terrifying than the glitch devil. That was chaos. This was a quiet, orderly, and eternal damnation. To live without the simple, profound joy of a good meal. Of a cool drink on a hot day, it was a life stripped of one of its most fundamental pleasures. It was a gray, functional existence. A perfect, horrible equilibrium. Fami stared at Naruto, her face a mask of utter, unadulterated astonishment. This was a solution so elegant in its cruelty, so perfect in its horror, that she could never have conceived of it. He hadn't fought her on her own terms. He had sidestepped her entire philosophy and created a third state of being that was neither hunger nor satisfaction. Her pet devil, its food source now conceptually erased from existence, let out a tiny, pathetic whimper and then dissolved into dust, its purpose in the universe rendered null and void. Fami looked from the dust motes to Naruto. The awe in her eyes was now mixed with something else. A spark, a deep, intellectual, and perhaps even emotional hunger of a kind she had never known. He was the most interesting thing to happen to the universe in millennia. She broke into a slow, genuine smile, utterly different from the serene, condescending one she had worn before. It was a smile of pure, ravenous fascination. Astonishing, she breathed, truly, utterly astonishing. She took a step closer to him, her ringed eyes locked on his placid blue ones. She had come here to admire her own work, a monument to want. She had found something infinitely more compelling, a monument to absolute balance. My experiment is concluded, she declared, her voice filled with a newfound energy. And I have found my new thesis. She stopped directly in front of him, her presence no longer feeling like a vortex of need, but one of focused, singular intent. Naruto, she said, the name sounding like a delicious flavor on her tongue. I must understand you, your philosophy, your nature, the journey you are on. May I accompany you? Asa and Yoru could only watch from the cornfield, two forgotten variables in an equation that had just become infinitely more complex. The famine devil, one of the great existential threats to humanity, had just asked to join the entourage of the only being who might be even more terrifying. Naruto lowered his hand, his expression giving no hint of his thoughts. He looked at the girl before him, the ancient being of hunger who now looked at him with an appetite for knowledge that was as profound as her previous craving for suffering. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Unchained Melody. The aircraft was a relic, a brutalist beast of rivets and iron that had once borne the proud red star of the Soviet Air Forces. Now stripped of its insignia, its fuselage painted a non-committal shade of charcoal gray, it plowed through the upper atmosphere with a bone-jarring, monotonous roar. The interior was as Spartan as a monk's cell, a long, cavernous tube lined with cold metal benches. There were no windows. The only light came from a series of caged, yellow bulbs that cast long, dancing shadows, making the cramped space feel both infinite and claustrophobic. The air was thin and recycled, tasting of chilled metal and engine exhaust. Upon one of these benches sat the universe's most unlikely traveling companions. Naruto sat nearest the cockpit, his posture perfect, his back not touching the cold metal behind him. He was reading again, this time a dense textbook on quantum mechanics. The complex equations on the page seemingly holding his complete and undivided attention. His presence was a null zone, a pocket of absolute stillness that seemed to push back against the plane's violent vibrations. The rattling of the fuselage was noticeably softer in his immediate vicinity, the engine's roar a duller, more distant hum. Beside him, practically vibrating with a predatory curiosity, was Fami. She had abandoned her elegant dress for more practical, dark travel attire, but her scale-shaped earring still swung gently with the plane's lurches. She was not reading. Her ringed eyes were fixed on Naruto, her head tilted in the manner of a bird studying a particularly fascinating beetle. For the past 4 hours, she had maintained a near-constant stream of philosophical and hypothetical inquiries, each one designed to probe the edges of his nature. A purely hypothetical question, she chirped, her melodic voice cutting cleanly through the engine drone. Consider a closed system designed by its creator for the sole purpose of self-annihilation at a predetermined time. When that time comes and it fulfills its function, is that act a fulfillment of its purpose, and therefore a state of balance? Or is the act of self-destruction itself the ultimate imbalance? Naruto turned a page, the sound crisp and definitive. The premise is flawed, he stated without looking up, his voice a calm, resonant counterpoint to her bright tone. A system designed for destruction is inherently imbalanced. Its purpose is a directed flow towards a state of greater entropy. The fulfillment of that purpose is merely the conclusion of a prolonged state of instability. True balance would be the neutralization of the directive itself. Fami's smile widened. She loved his answers. They were so clean, so absolute, so devoid of the messy, sentimental morality that plagued most sentient beings. He didn't talk about right or wrong, only of systems, states, and equilibrium. It was intoxicating. Further down the bench, huddled into herself, was Asa Mitaka. She had a pair of cheap headphones clamped over her ears, blasting a 3-year-old J-pop song at a volume that should have been painful. It was a futile attempt to drown out the conversation beside her, and more importantly, the voice inside her head. He's explaining his operating system to her, Yoru seethed, her mental voice. A frantic scribble of tactical analysis and existential dread. Does he not recognize she's a threat? Or does he simply not care? Famine and balance, discussing the metaphysics of destruction like two professors at a symposium. This is insane. Asa squeezed her eyes shut. Maybe if I ignore them hard enough, they'll cease to exist, she thought, a desperate, childish wish. The last 5 days had been a blur of surreal horror. After Naruto had adjusted Hokkaido, Fami had attached herself to him with the cheerful tenacity of a remora. She had arranged their transport on this ghost flight with a few whispered words into a satellite phone, manipulating unseen levers of power with casual ease. Asa had been swept along, a piece of driftwood caught in the current of two colliding cosmic rivers. She felt a nudge. She opened her eyes. Fami was looking at her, her smile undiminished. "You're very quiet, Asa Mitaka," the famine devil observed. "Does the philosophical discourse not interest you? Or are you simply contemplating the void?" "I'm contemplating how much I want to be literally anywhere else," Asa muttered, pulling her headphones off. The J-pop song died, leaving the roar of the engines and the heavy weight of the atmosphere to rush back in. "A desire," Fami noted, tapping a thoughtful finger to her chin. "An imbalance between your current state and your preferred state. A tiny, personal hunger. According to our friend here, that is the root of your discomfort." "My discomfort," Asa retorted, her voice sharp with frayed nerves, "stems from being trapped in a flying tin CAN with two beings who debate the end of the world like it's a chess problem, heading towards a place I can't pronounce to see a bomb I don't want to be within 1,000 miles of." Naruto turned another page. "KOLTSO4. He corrected calmly, without looking up. "It is a technocratic city-state located on the Gaiden Peninsula in northern Siberia. And the device is not a bomb in the conventional sense. A bomb creates chaos through a violent, exothermic release of energy. This device is designed to create a zone of absolute nullity by erasing quantum-level information. It is a weapon of enforced silence and stillness. An imbalance of void." He paused, his blue eyes finally lifting from the page to gaze at nothing in particular. "It represents a significant concentration of potential energy, SKEWED, towards a negative systemic outcome. It requires review." The casual way he said it, review, as if he were a cosmic auditor on his way to check a minor accounting error, was more chilling than any declaration of war. He wasn't going to destroy it. He was going to assess it, to judge it. And if he found it wanting, he would balance it. Asa shuddered, the memory of the joyless, efficient Aya Ting in Hokkaido still fresh and foul in her mind. The plane began its descent. A heavy, clunking sound echoed through the fuselage as the landing gear locked into place. Through the floor plates, Asa could feel the air outside growing colder, denser. The finality of their arrival settled in her stomach like a stone. Koltso 4 was not a city. It was a statement, carved out of the permafrost in defiant strokes of concrete, steel, and paranoia. It rose from the flat, white Siberian tundra like a geometric virus, a collection of stark, brutalist towers and windowless laboratories connected by enclosed, frost-proof sky bridges. There were no parks, no plazas, no splashes of color. Everything was gray, white, or the black of reinforced carbon. The city was surrounded by 3 concentric rings of security fences, topped with arrays of sensors that bristled like the spines of a sea urchin. The air was unnaturally still and cold, and the silence was profound, broken only by the distant, mournful howl of the Arctic wind. This was a place built to keep the world out, and its secrets in. Their plane landed not at an airport, but on a desolate, windswept strip of black tarmac that ended abruptly at the first security fence. A single, armored vehicle waited for them, its engine running, spewing a plume of white exhaust into the frigid air. 2 guards emerged, clad in white, insulated armor, their faces hidden behind reflective black visors. They carried rifles that looked more like scientific instruments than weapons. They were human, but their posture and movements were rigid, mechanical. Fami stepped off the boarding ramp first, a picture of unconcerned grace in the face of the Arctic gale. She approached the guards and presented a small, unassuming data chip. One of the guards scanned it. A series of green lights blinked on his wrist-mounted device. "Clearance code accepted, Inspector," the guard said, his voice tinny and distorted by his helmet's speaker. "Director Volkov was not expecting you for another week." Fami smiled sweetly. "I find that arriving unexpectedly provides a much more honest assessment of a project's progress, don't you? My associates and I require full access. Category Alpha." The guard hesitated, his helmeted head turning towards Naruto and Asa. "My orders are for 1. These associates are not on the manifest." Fami's smile did not change, but the air around her seemed to thin. She took a small step closer to the guard. "My dear Sergeant," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential, almost intimate whisper. "You have a daughter, don't you? In the Novosibirsk enclave. You desire, more than anything, for her to get into the top science academy. You want her to have a future better than this frozen wasteland." A future of importance, of satisfaction. The guard went rigid. His rifle dipped a fraction of an inch. How? I can make that happen, Fami continued, her voice a silken promise. A scholarship. A glowing recommendation from a very influential inspector. All of your desire for her future, fulfilled. All I need from you is a tiny little bit of flexibility. Update the manifest. Category Alpha. For all three of us. It's a very small price to pay for your daughter's happiness, isn't it? The guard stood frozen for a long moment, the Arctic wind whipping around them. Asa could feel the silent battle taking place eyed his helmet. A lifetime of rigid training versus the overwhelming, primal need to provide for his child. It wasn't a fair fight. Updating manifest, the guard said, his voice now strained. He tapped a few commands into his wrist device. Welcome to KOLTS-04, Inspector. All three of you. As they were driven through the sterile, echoing canyons of the city, Asa watched the faceless buildings slide by. This place was the architectural equivalent of Naruto's philosophy. Functional, efficient, and utterly devoid of warmth or joy. Yoru was a low growl in her mind. Fami's power is more insidious than I remembered. She doesn't just command hunger, she manipulates the very concept of want. She could topple governments with a whisper. She's more dangerous than 1,000 armies. And she's our travel agent, Asa thought. The bitter sarcasm a thin shield against her fear. In the heart of the city, 500 meters beneath the permafrost, was a chamber that was part laboratory, part cathedral. It was a vast, circular room. Its walls lined with humming supercomputers and conduits that pulsed with a cold, blue light. In the center of the chamber, suspended in a web of magnetic containment fields, was the reason for the city's existence. The silence bomb. It was not a bomb in any recognizable sense. It was a perfect, 2-meter-wide sphere of what looked like polished obsidian, identical in appearance to the object the glitch devil had become. But this was no inert byproduct. This was a weapon. The air around it was distorted, as if by immense heat, but it was cold to the point of absurdity. A zone of absolute zero where the laws of thermodynamics had been bullied into submission. Director Volkov stood on an observation deck overlooking the sphere, his hands clasped behind his back. He was a tall, skeletal man with a severe face and eyes the color of faded steel. He wore a pristine white lab coat, a stark contrast to the black heart of his creation. To him, this was the pinnacle of human achievement. Devils were forces of nature, primal and chaotic. They could be fought, contracted, even killed. But they were ultimately beyond true human control. This weapon, however, was different. It didn't kill with fire or force. It killed with logic. It unmade things. Final calibration sequence initiated, a technician's voice announced over the intercom. Core resonance is stable at 99.9%. Volkov allowed himself a thin, rare smile. He had seen the reports from Nico. The sphering of the glitch devil. He didn't know who or what had done it, but he saw it as a validation of his own work. Annihilation through conceptual negation. That was the future of warfare. His weapon was designed to do the same, but on a scale that could silence a city, a nation, a devil of any magnitude. It would not turn them into a neat little sphere, it would simply erase them from existence, leaving behind a zone of perfect, stable nothingness. He would impose ORDER on a chaotic world through the thread of absolute erasure. In another sector of the subterranean complex, in a room that was meticulously designed to look like a comfortable apartment, Reese sat on the edge of her bed. The room was clean, sterile, and equipped with everything she could need. It was also under 24-hour surveillance. It was not a home. It was a containment cell for a weapon of mass destruction. She was running a whetstone along the edge of a combat knife, the rhythmic schlick of steel on stone the only sound in the room. Her movements were economical, precise, reigned through years of relentless training. She was Hybrid Subject 07, the Union's greatest success and its most terrifying secret. She was the bomb devil. But as her hands performed the familiar, deadly ritual, her eyes were fixed on a small, tattered postcard taped to the wall above her desk. It was a cheap, faded picture of a cafe in Paris, with a red awning and little tables on the sidewalk. To her, that image was a more potent fantasy than any heaven. It was a world of choices. A world where you could decide to sit and have a coffee, not because it was on your schedule, but simply because you wanted to. A world without handlers, without training exercises, without the constant, simmering potential for violence that lived under her skin. She set the knife down, its edge now lethally sharp. She pulled the pin on her collar. The grenade pin trigger that was the key to her transformation. It was a part of her, a constant reminder of what she was. She held it in her hand, the cold metal a familiar weight. She was a bomb, waiting for a signal. She was a melody of destruction, waiting for a conductor. And she was so tired of the song, seeking to escape the prying eyes of the cameras. To find a moment of unobserved silence, she slipped out of her apartment and headed for the deep-level service corridors, a maze of pipes and conduits that the security patrols rarely bothered with. It was the only place in KOLTSO4 where she felt she could breathe. The alarm was subtle, a soft chime rather than a blaring siren, but its effect was instantaneous. Red lights began to strobe in the corridor, and a heavy blast door slammed down, separating Asa and Fami from Naruto. "Security sweep," Fami said, her tone more annoyed than alarmed. "How tedious. It seems my associate's desire for his daughter's future wasn't strong enough to override the automated protocols completely." "We're trapped," Asa said, her voice rising in panic. "We are temporarily inconvenienced," Fami corrected, already examining the control panel on the blast door. "Don't fret. A locked door is just a physical manifestation of the desire to keep people out. And I am an expert in want." Yoru screamed in Asa's head. "Forget the door. Naruto is alone. We need to get to the bomb. That's the strategic objective." On the other side of the door, Naruto simply stopped. He looked at the heavy steel barrier, and at the corridor stretching out before him. The route was blocked. A trivial imbalance. He consulted a mental map of the facility he had constructed from the blueprints Fami had acquired. There was an alternate path. Through a series of subterranean training areas. He turned and began to walk, his pace unvaried. He entered a cavernous, concrete space, designed for live fire exercises. It was empty now, smelling of cold ozone and cordite. He was halfway across the cavern when a figure emerged from a darkened passage on the other side. It was Rize. She froze, her body instantly snapping into a combat-ready stance. Her eyes, a startling shade of green, narrowed as she assessed the intruder. He wore no uniform. He carried no weapon. He did not look like a soldier or a scientist. He was an anomaly. "Kato Tai?" she asked, her voice sharp, the Russian words like chips of ice. "Who are you?" Naruto stopped. He regarded her with his usual placid curiosity. "My name is Naruto." Rize's training screamed at her. Unidentified civilian in a restricted, deep-level sector. Threat potential. Unknown, assumed high. Her orders were clear. Neutralize any unauthorized personnel. But something about him gave her pause. The utter lack of fear in his posture. The complete calm in his deep blue eyes. She decided on a test. A gentle probe to gauge his capabilities. It was a gesture she had practiced 1,000 times. A flick of her wrist. A spark of intent. A small, focused explosion detonated in the air 5 feet to Naruto's left. It wasn't meant to be lethal, but it was powerful enough to send a normal man flying. To deafen and disorient him. The sound of it was a sharp, brutal crack. The flash was blinding, but Naruto did not fly. He did not flinch. He did not even blink. The explosion happened, but it was wrong. The wave of concussive force, the spray of superheated air and shrapnel, it all just stopped a few feet from his body. It was as if it had hit an invisible, perfectly absorbent wall. Even the sound was strangely muffled, the sharp crack becoming a dull thump. The light of the flash was drank by the stillness around him, leaving no afterimage. Rize stared, her mouth slightly agape. Her power, the very concept of a bomb, a sudden, violent, chaotic release of energy, had been effortlessly negated. It was like throwing a rock into a pond and seeing it simply vanish before it hit the water. It was impossible. Naruto's gaze did not waver. He wasn't looking at her hands, the source of the attack. He was looking at her face, at her eyes. His observation was not judgmental, merely factual. "Your internal systems are in a state of constant, high-level conflict," he said, his voice even and calm, carrying across the space as if the explosion had never happened. "The program, D directive for controlled violence and the underlying desire for systemic autonomy are causing a severe energy drain. It is an inefficient state of being. Reese felt the words like a physical blow. Not an attack, but a diagnosis. He wasn't talking to the bomb devil. He wasn't addressing hybrid subject 07. He was speaking to her, to the warring factions inside her own soul. He had looked past the bomb and seen the girl. He had looked past the weapon and seen the faulty, inefficient, and deeply tired machine. In that single, clinical statement, he had described the entire tragedy of her existence. No one had ever seen her so clearly, and no one had ever made her feel so completely, utterly exposed. The tactical part of her brain, the part that had been screaming, threat, fell silent. A new, terrifying, and strangely hopeful feeling began to take its place. He's initiating the arming sequence. Yoru shrieked in Ace's mind. They had reached the observation deck overlooking the bomb chamber. Fami having bypassed a dozen security systems with a series of subtle, whispered promises to the network AI itself. Below them, Director Volkov, his face pale with fury and panic at the sight of them, was at a console. His finger hovering over the final activation key. Alarms, real ones this time, blared through the complex. Intruders in Sector Gamma. Hostile intent confirmed. I am activating the device. Silence protocol initiated. Volkov's voice, raw with fanaticism, echoed in the chamber. The obsidian sphere in the center of the room began to glow, not with light, but with a terrifying anti-light. A darkness that seemed to be actively consuming the blue glow of the containment field. A low, bone-deep hum filled the air, the sound of reality being stretched thin. Asa, a weapon, now, Yoru commanded, but Asa was frozen, her eyes wide with terror, staring at the growing void. It was then that another door to the chamber slid open. Naruto walked in, as unhurried as ever. And right behind him, her expression a mixture of confusion, awe, and dawning resolve, was Reese. Volkov's eyes widened further at the sight of his prize weapon apparently consorting with the enemy. Subject 07. Neutralize them. That is an order. Quote. Reese looked from Volkov's frantic face to Naruto's calm back. An order. Her whole life had been a series of orders. But the man in front of her didn't give orders. He made observations. He saw things as they were. He saw her. Naruto ignored the frantic director and the blaring alarms. He walked directly towards the humming, glowing sphere of nothingness, his footsteps silent on the metal floor. It is beautiful, in its own terrible way, Fami murmured from beside Asa, her ringed eyes gleaming with academic appreciation for the weapon's conceptual power. Naruto reached the edge of the containment platform. He did not try to break the field. He simply placed his open palm against its shimmering surface. The bone-jarring hum intensified. The sphere of anti-light pulsed. This weapon is designed to create a zone of absolute nullity by erasing information. Naruto's voice cut through the din, impossibly clear. It is an induced imbalance. A forced void. He closed his eyes for a moment. The trigger is linked to the core. The core generates the erasure field. A linear progression towards a negative outcome. He opened his eyes. I am not deleting the function. I am retasking it. He did not push. He did not channel energy. He simply connected. He wove a new line of logic into the weapon's fundamental code. I have linked the trigger mechanism to the containment field on a conceptual level, he explained, his voice as calm as a lecturer's. The command to generate the erasure field is now simultaneously a command to reinforce the containment field that prevents its expansion. The potential for explosion is now perfectly and perpetually cancelled by the potential for its own prevention. For it to activate, it must first deactivate itself. It is a stable, closed loop. It is now balanced. As he finished speaking, the blaring alarm sputtered and died. The deep hum faded into silence. The terrifying anti-light within the sphere receded, collapsing in on itself until it was once again just a ball of inert, polished black obsidian. It was still there. It was still a weapon of unimaginable power. But it could never be fired. It had been turned into a permanent, impotent monument to its own failed purpose. Director Volkov stared, his face slack with disbelief. His ultimate weapon, his solution to the world's chaos, had been uttered with a touch and a paragraph of philosophical jargon. He crumpled to his knees, a broken man. In the sudden, profound silence of the chamber, Naruto lowered his hand and turned to leave. Rize watched him go. She looked at the inert bomb, the symbol of ultimate, sterile destruction. Then she looked at him, the avatar of ultimate, sterile balance. He had not destroyed the bomb. He had not destroyed her. He had simply stopped the violence. He had resolved the conflict without a fight, without a single casualty. He offered an alternative to the endless cycle of detonation and destruction she had been born into. It was a new song. A melody of stillness. And she wanted to learn how to hear it. As Naruto walked towards the exit, Rize made a choice. She fell into step quietly behind him, leaving her past, her cage, and her frantic, defeated creators behind without a backward glance. Fami watched this new addition to their party with an amused, analytical smile, her head tilted. "Oh, this is getting interesting," she murmured. His aura of equilibrium seems to be an attractant for unstable variables. A fascinating paradox. Asa and Yoru could only stare as the bomb devil, one of the most feared hybrids on the planet, docilely joined their bizarre procession. Asa felt a fresh wave of dizziness. Her party of misfits had just acquired another member, another primal-level power drawn into the orbit of the strange, quiet enigma who called himself the Balance Devil. The four of them walked out of the silent laboratory and into the cold, sterile corridors of KOLTS-04, leaving a TRA ill of broken ambitions and neutralized apocalypses in their wake. The journey was getting stranger, and the destination was nowhere in sight. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Gaze of the Marionette. In an office that occupied the entire top floor of the public safety headquarters in Tokyo, the only sound was the soft, rhythmic tick-tock of a minimalist wall clock. Each tick was a hammer blow of order, each tock a confirmation of control. The office was a monument to serene, absolute authority. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, godlike view of the sprawling city below, transforming the chaos of millions of lives into a silent, glittering tapestry. The air was cool, filtered, and smelled faintly of expensive black tea and old books. There were no personal effects, no clutter, no wasted space. There was only a large, dark mahogany desk, 2 chairs, and the woman who sat behind it. Makima's eyes, a hypnotic gold with concentric red rings, were fixed on the 3 files laid out before her in a perfect, equidistant line. The first was from Nico, detailing the inexplicable sphering of a primal-level threat and the testimony of a shell-shocked high school girl, Asa Mitaka. The second, from Hokkaido, was a far stranger report on the sudden, conceptual neutering of an entire region's agricultural output, followed by its equally sudden rebalancing. The file contained a single, blurry satellite image of 3 figures walking away from the fields: a girl in a school uniform, a girl with distinctive braids, and a man with blonde hair. The third file was the most alarming. It was a flash-coded, eyes-only report from a deep-cover agent within the remnants of the Soviet Union's special weapons program. It spoke of a catastrophic security breach at the KOLTS-04 facility, neutralization of their ultimate weapon, the silence bomb, and the defection of their most prized asset, hybrid subject 07, Rize. All 3 files were linked by a single, impossible variable, a man named Naruto. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. Her movements were graceful, economical, each one imbued with an unshakable confidence. Devils feared her, humans obeyed her, nations negotiated with her. She was the control devil, and her world was a complex, intricate puppet show where she held every string. She manipulated fears, desires, loyalties, and hatreds to guide humanity towards a future of her own design, a better world, free from the great, terrifying devils, a world where only she would be remembered and, therefore, feared. It was a grand, benevolent, and utterly tyrannical ambition. And now, a new player had walked onto her stage, uninvited. A player who moved without strings. This, Naruto, did not operate according to any known rules. He didn't seem to have a contract. He didn't exhibit the chaotic energy of a devil or the tortured fusion of a hybrid. His actions were not destructive in the conventional sense. He didn't burn cities or eat people. He edited them. He corrected what he perceived as errors. He imposed a strange, sterile, absolute balance that was, in its own way, more terrifying than any rampage. The sphere in Nico, the joyless food in Hokkaido, the impotent bomb in Siberia, they were not acts of war. They were theorems, proven with terrifying finality. He was an outside context problem. A walking singularity that threatened the very foundations of her power. Her control stemmed from understanding and manipulating the desires and fears that made up a being's nature. But what was the nature of a man who, according to every report, seemed to want nothing and fear nothing? How do you leash a void? Aki. Her voice was soft, yet it carried the weight of an unshakable command. From the shadows in the corner of the room, Aki Hayakawa stepped forward. His face was set in its usual grim lines, his hair tied back in its topknot. The hilt of his katana was visible over his shoulder, a promise of swift, lethal violence. He said nothing, simply waiting for his orders. His loyalty to Makima as absolute and unthinking as gravity. We have visitors in the city, Makima said, her gaze drifting to the window, to the sprawling metropolis below. A small, interesting collection of anomalies. A high school girl who shares her body with my esteemed colleague, the War Devil. The Famine Devil, apparently on a sabbatical from creating misery. The Bomb Devil, recently liberated from her cage. And their apparent leader, a man named Naruto. Aki's stoicism didn't crack, but a flicker of tension tightened the corners of his eyes. That was a rost of threats that could level a country. Your orders. An invitation, Aki, Makima said, turning her mesmerizing gaze upon him. Not a raid, not an attack, an invitation. I wish to have a conversation. Find them. Bring them here. Be polite, but be persuasive. I feel it is time we were properly introduced. Aki bowed his head slightly. Understood. He turned and walked out, his footsteps silent on the polished floor. A loyal sword dispatched to summon a god. Makima turned her attention back to the files. She picked up the photo of Naruto, a grainy image where his features were indistinct but his posture was clear, calm, poised. Absolute. A faint, curious smile touched her lips. For the first time in a very long time, she had encountered something she did not understand. And the control devil's deepest, most profound desire was to control, to understand, to possess everything. This Naruto was the ultimate prize. The ramen shop was a tiny, cramped oasis of warmth and savory steam in the bustling heart of Shinjuku. It was a place of beautiful, chaotic imbalance. The clatter of bowls, the shouted orders of the chef, the slurping of noodles, the dizzying array of competing smells, it was life, messy and vibrant. Asa Mitaka was halfway through a bowl of tonkatsu ramen, and it was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. After the conceptual horror of Hokkaido, the simple, honest pleasure of the rich pork broth. The chewy noodles, and the salty slice of chashu was a religious experience. It was a confirmation that life, with all its struggles, was worth living. This is inefficient, Fami observed from across the small table, picking at a bowl of bamboo shoots with a pair of chopsticks. She hadn't ordered a main dish, content to simply analyze the experience. The NT of sodium and saturated fat is detrimental to long-term systemic health. The pleasure derived as a temporary chemical reaction in the brain, a fleeting spike of satisfaction that creates a cycle of dependency. From a purely functional standpoint, it's a deeply flawed method of energy intake. If you say the word, balance, one more time, Asa said through a mouthful of noodles, I am going to you. Say this spoon to perform a very inefficient and messy lobotomy on you. Yoru cackled in her head. Do it. A war between a high school girl and the famine devil over a bowl of ramen. The glorious absurdity. It would be a legend for the ages. Quote, on Asa's right, Reese was quietly, methodically working her way through her own bowl. She ate with the focused precision of a soldier, but her eyes, for the first time Asa could remember, seemed soft. She watched the other patrons, the laughing couple on a date, the salaryman reading a newspaper. She was observing a new habitat, a world of mundane peace she'd only ever seen on postcards. Each sip of broth, each bite of noodle, was a small, quiet act of rebellion against the life she had left behind. It was a choice, her choice. Naruto, seated beside Fami, was not eating. He had a glass of water before him, its surface a perfect, still mirror. He was watching the people around them, his placid blue gaze taking in the entire chaotic symphony of the ramen shop. He was not judging it. He was not enjoying it. He was simply perceiving it. A complex system of interacting variables, a microcosm of the city outside. The desire for flavorful food is a powerful motivator for social cohesion and economic activity, he stated, his voice cutting cleanly through the noise. The inefficiency of the nutritional content is balanced by the efficiency of the socio-economic function. This establishment, therefore, exists in a state of relative equilibrium. Fami clapped her hands together softly, delighted. An excellent point. The system within a system. So, a small imbalance can serve a larger balance. Fascinating. It was at that moment that a shadow fell over their table. Asa looked up to see a man in a black public safety suit standing there. He was tall, grim-faced, with a topknot. His presence sucked the warmth out of their small space, replacing it with a cold, professional dread. It was Aki Hayakawa. Naruto-san, Aki said, his voice flat and formal. He didn't acknowledge anyone else at the table, his entire focus on the blonde man. Makima-san extends her compliments and requests the pleasure of your company at your earliest convenience. Yoru went rigid. Makima, the control devil, it's a trap, Asa. She knows who we are. She's come for us. Asa's half-eaten ramen suddenly felt like a lead weight in her stomach. Her blood ran cold. Fami's cheerful, analytical expression was replaced by a look of sharp, predatory cunning. Her ringed eyes narrowed. The control devil, she murmured, a hint of professional rivalry in her tone. Shish. He always did have a flair for the dramatic. Sending her top hound to deliver an invitation. Reese tensed, her hand instinctively drifting down to her side, near where the grenade pin on her collar would be. Her newfound peace shattered, replaced by the cold instincts of a cornered weapon. Naruto was the only one who remained completely unmoved. He looked up at Aki, his blue eyes as calm as a deep sea. There was no surprise, no fear, no anger. He simply took in the information. An invitation, Naruto repeated, as if tasting the concept. A desire for interaction, presented as a request. The underlying implication, however, is one of command. Aki's jaw tightened. Makima-san would be most persuasive. Naruto considered this for a moment. He then turned his head to look at Asa, then Fami, then Reese. It was not a glance seeking permission, but one of simple acknowledgement. He was the center of this. The invitation was for him. They were his associates. He turned back to Aki. Inform Makima-san that we accept her invitation, he said. He then picked up his glass of water and took a slow, deliberate sip. We will finish our meal first. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the statement hung in the air. Aki, a man who devils feared, a man who could summon forces that could level city blocks, was being told that his boss, the most powerful woman in Japan, would have to wait until they were done with lunch. He was so taken aback that for a moment, his professional mask cracked, revealing a flicker of stunned disbelief. But the calm certainty in Naruto's eyes was absolute. This was not a negotiation. It was a statement of fact. Aki gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. I will wait outside. He turned and left the shop, resuming a position on the street corner, a silent, menacing statue in a black suit. Asa let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Her hands were shaking. Are you crazy? She whispered, leaning across the table towards Naruto. That's the control devil. You don't make her wait. The desire to eat is a present imbalance, Naruto stated simply. Her desire to speak is a future imbalance. One must be resolved before addressing the next. It is a matter of logical progression. He looked at her half-eaten bowl of ramen. Your systemic anxiety is preventing you from completing your nutritional intake. You should finish. The broth is getting cold. Yoru was practically having an aneurysm in Asa's brain, a screaming vortex of rage, fear, and grudging, terrified respect. He was treating a summons from the control devil like a dinner reservation. The sheer, cosmic nerve of it was a power all its own. The public safety headquarters was a fortress of order. The lobby was vast, white, and silent, the air still and cold. Their footsteps echoed on the polished marble floors as Aki led them towards a restricted elevator. Devil hunters in black suits watched them pass, their expressions a mixture of suspicion, hostility, and fear. They recognized Reese. They saw the distinctive earring on Fami. They looked at Asa and saw the girl from the Nico file. And they looked at Naruto, this calm, unknown figure who was clearly the center of this storm. and their hands instinctively moved closer to their weapons. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent and heavy with unspoken tension. When the doors opened, they stepped directly into Makima's office. The woman herself stood by the vast window, her back to them, a silhouette against the glittering cityscape. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice smooth and pleasant as she turned to face them. Her ringed, golden eyes swept over the group, assessing each of them in a fraction of a second. Fami, the rival; Riz, the rogue weapon; Asa and Yoru, the chaotic variable. And finally, her gaze settled on Naruto. It lingered, a tangible force, a probe of immense psychic pressure. "I am Makima, director of this division. I trust your meal was satisfactory." "It was in equilibrium," Naruto replied, his voice calm. Meeting her gaze without faltering, Makima's lips curved into a gentle, welcoming smile that did not reach her eyes. "I have been reading about your travels. Nikko, Hokkaido, KOLTSO4. You have a talent for resolving difficult situations. A unique talent." She gestured towards one of the chairs in front of her desk. "Please." Naruto sat. The others remained standing behind him, a strange, silent retinue. Makima remained standing, a subtle assertion of dominance. She leaned against the edge of her desk, her posture relaxed, casual, but her entire being was focused on him. This was it, the test. "I have a simple philosophy, Naruto-san," she began, her voice like honey. "This world is full of fears. Devils, war, death, hunger. These are unpleasant things. Unnecessary things. My goal is to create a better world, a world free from such unpleasantness. A world where humanity can live in peace, without fear." She paused, her gaze intensifying. "To do this, one needs control. The power to erase the things that cause suffering. I believe you understand the concept of erasure." This was the moment. Asa felt it. Yoru felt it. A shift in the air. Makima was reaching out with her power. It wasn't a visible attack. It was a silent, irresistible command issued from one mind to another. It was the fundamental ability of the control devil, the power to make any being she believed to be lesser than herself obey her completely. It was a power that had tamed fiends, broken devils, and bent entire governments to her will. She was looking at Naruto, believing him to be lesser, and issuing her first, simple command: "Submit to me." Asa felt a wave of vicarious terror, expecting Naruto to seize up, to become another one of Makima's puppets. But Naruto did not change. His posture remained relaxed, his breathing remained even, his placid blue eyes continued to meet her hypnotic golden ones. Nothing happened. He was not resisting her. Resisting implied a struggle, a pushing back against her will. This was different. Her command, her absolute conceptual power, simply washed over him and found nothing to purchase. It was like trying to grab a handful of fog. There was nothing there to control. A being of perfect balance has no desires to manipulate, no fears to leverage, no will to be bent. He was not a fortress resisting a siege, he was a vacuum into which her power simply vanished without effect. Makima's smile, for the first time, became fixed. A tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of confusion appeared in her eyes. She had just tried to move a mountain with her mind, and the mountain hadn't even registered the effort. She tried again, harder this time, focusing her entire, immense will on him. "Tell me your name. Tell me your nature. Obey." Naruto blinked slowly. "Your methods are flawed," he said, his voice as calm as ever, completely unaffected. "You seek to create a better world by deleting variables you deem negative. This does not create balance. It creates a vacuum, an engineered, unstable state built upon a foundation of absence. The fear you erase will simply be replaced by a new, more terrible fear, the fear of you." The silence in the room was absolute. The soft ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder, a countdown to some terrible revelation. Makima straightened up, her serene facade finally cracking, replaced by a look of profound, chilling intensity. He was immune. This thing was immune to her, to the very concept of her power. "I see," she said, her voice now stripped of its false warmth, leaving only cold, hard precision. "You are not a devil. You are not a human. You are a philosophical absolute. An antithesis. A being that cannot be controlled as a threat to order. An imbalance. She had failed to leash him. So, the next logical step was to destroy him. Aki, she said, without taking her eyes off Naruto. From the hallway, a dozen elite devil hunters, including Aki, flooded into the room, their weapons raised. Contracts were invoked. The air crackled with power. The hulking form of the violence fiend materialized. A man's arms turned into writhing tentacles of the octopus devil. Aki placed a hand on the hilt of his katana, ready to call upon the cursed devil. Fami giggled, a sound of pure, delighted amusement. Oh, she's throwing a tantrum. How wonderful. Rize took a half step in front of Naruto, her body a shield. A silent declaration of her new allegiance. Naruto, however, simply stood up from the chair. He looked at the assembled hunters, at their activated powers, at their grim, determined faces. He showed no aggression, no fear. He merely observed the new set of variables. A demonstration of force, he noted calmly. An attempt to restore your sense of control by applying a lesser, physical form of it. This is also inefficient. A volley of specially designed, curse-enchanted bullets shot towards him from multiple directions. They never reached him. They stopped dead in midair, a few feet from his body, as if frozen in amber. Their kinetic energy, their velocity, their very purpose as projectiles, was instantly and silently negated. They just hung there for a moment, inert and useless, before dropping to the marble floor with a series of soft, anticlimactic clinks. The violence fiend charged, a mountain of muscle and raw power, its fist cocked back to shatter him into dust. As its fist entered Naruto's personal space, the fiend's immense strength vanished. Its muscles went slack, its momentum ceased. It stumbled to a halt, looking down at its now powerless arms with a look of bovine confusion. The concept of violence had been locally balanced into a state of non-violence. Aki drew his blade. Curse devil, he began to intone, ready to saker IFICE years of his own life for a fatal blow. But the words died in his throat. The air around him grew heavy, the power he was trying to summon dissipating like smoke. The contract refused to form. He price could not be paid because the desired effect could not be achieved. Naruto took a step towards them. The devil hunters took an involuntary step back. He wasn't attacking. He wasn't even moving fast. But his very presence, this aura of absolute, effortless negation, was the most terrifying weapon they had ever faced. How do you fight an enemy who can make your ability to fight cease to exist? He walked through the line of stunned, impotent hunters as if they were statues in a garden. He paused at the door, turning back to look at Makima, who stood frozen behind her desk, her face a mask of cold, calculating fury and a dawning, obsessive fascination. Control is an illusion, Naruto said, his final statement hanging in the silent, sterile air. There is only balance. He turned and walked out, followed by his strange entourage. Fami gave Makima a cheerful, mocking little wave. Rize shot her a look of cold, defiant freedom. Asa just looked terrified. The elevator doors closed, leaving Makima alone in her office with her defeated, useless hunters. She walked slowly to the window, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. She stared down at the city, her grand puppet show. For the first time, a string had been cut. No, not cut. A piece had appeared on the board that had no strings at all. Her initial assessment had been wrong. He was not just a prize to be won. He was not just an obstacle to be removed. He was a challenge to the very core of her being. The one thing in the entire world she could not control. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated obsession. Naruto, she whispered to the glass, her breath fogging a small patch. I will have you. I will understand you. And then, I will control you. Even if I have to unbalance the entire world to do it. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Forgotten War. The silence in the aftermath of their departure from public safety headquarters was a different entity from the silence Naruto projected. His was a stillness of substance, a plenum of equilibrium. The silence that filled the back of the black, windowless van Fami had procured was a vacuum, born from the absence of sound and filled with the crackling static of frayed nerves. Asa Mitaka sat hunched on a bench, her knees drawn up to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. The Ost of Makima's hypnotic gaze felt like it was still crawling on her skin, a trail of spiders made of pure will. Every shadow in the van seemed to pulse with the memory of that sterile, terrifying office. Across from her, Reese was disassembling and reassembling a stolen assault rifle with a fluid, hypnotic economy of motion. It was a nervous tick, a retreat into the familiar mechanics of violence, but her eyes were distant. She wasn't seeing the weapon in her hands. She was seeing the impotent rage on Director Volkov's face, the moment a weapon of ultimate destruction became a useless museum piece. She was replaying the instant her nature as a bomb was rendered irrelevant, and the strange, quiet freedom that had followed. She was, for the first time, not a weapon waiting to be aimed, but a person deciding her own trajectory. And the sheer, vertigo-inducing scope of that choice was overwhelming. Fami, perched gracefully beside Reese, was humming a cheerful, atonal tune. She held a tablet, its screen reflecting in her ringed eyes as she scrolled through complex data streams, financial markets, encrypted government communications, devil activity reports. To her, the confrontation with Makima had been a delightful piece of theater, a clash of two opposing, absolute philosophies. She was the gleeful academic watching a beautiful, high-energy particle collision, taking meticulous notes on the resulting exotic matter. Her cortisol levels spiked by 300% when he negated the cursed devil contract, Fami remarked to no one in particular, her voice bright with scientific glee. The physiological response to a sudden, complete loss of perceived control. Fascinating. Her next move will be illogical, emotional, and therefore, wonderfully predictable. She will try to isolate him by removing by removing us. Asa flinched. Could you please not sound so happy about the fact that the most powerful woman in Japan has just put a kill order on all of us? A kill order is merely a strong statement of desire, Fami corrected airily, not looking up from her tablet. And Makima now desires our absence very, very much. It confirms my hypothesis. Her system of control is brittle. It cannot accommodate paradoxes. It can only delete them. At the far end of the van, a zone of palpable calm in the churning sea of anxiety, sat Naruto. He was examining a simple, arid maple leaf he had picked up from the street before they were hustled away. He turned it over and over in his fingers, studying the intricate network of veins, the pattern of its decay, the perfect, systematic process of its return to base components. He was utterly absorbed, the life and death drama of the past hour seemingly of less interest to him than the quiet, orderly death of a single leaf. You're not worried? Asa finally asked him, her voice small. About her. About what she'll do. Naruto's gaze shifted from the leaf to her. His deep blue eyes held no fear, no anger, only a dispassionate lucidity that was somehow more comforting than any hollow reassurance would have been. Worry is the inefficient expenditure of energy on a future probability. Makima represents a system seeking to impose an artificial, unstable order. She will act. We will respond. The variables will shift. The system will eventually find a new point of equilibrium. It is an inevitable process. He's talking about a war with the control devil like it's a chemistry experiment, Asa thought, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. He's not wrong. Yoru's voice cut in, sharp and analytical inside Asa's mind. The war devil had been uncharacteristically quiet, processing the confrontation. This is a conflict of concepts, not just of forces. Makima's control versus his balance. She seeks to write the rules. He is a rule. I have never seen anything like it. Every weapon she used, every tactic, he didn't break them. He proved they were irrelevant. How do you fight that? How do you declare war on a mathematical proof? For the first time, Asa heard a note of genuine, intellectual frustration in Yoru's voice, the sound of a master strategist encountering a game whose rules she couldn't even begin to comprehend. The van came to a smooth stop. The rear doors opened, flooding the dark interior with the gray light of a concrete underground parking garage. The safe house Fami had arranged was the sub-basement of a defunct pachinko parlor, a place so forgotten and saturated with the lingering misery of 1,000 gambling addictions that not even public safety would think to look for them there. As they settled into the dusty, neon-lit space, Fami's tablet chimed, a soft, melodic notification. Ah, she said, her eyes lighting up with fresh interest. Here is a delightful little puzzle. A palate cleanser after all that dreary business with state security. She turned the tablet around. It displayed a satellite map of a rugged, mountainous region. A single area, a valley nestled between several peaks, was circled in red. The data streams beside the image were a cascade of error messages and null readings. The Balkans, Fami explained, gesturing to the map with a slender finger. Specifically, a valley in the Dinaric Alps, a few dozen kilometers from Sarajevo. A place that, according to every historical and geological record, should have a history. There were Roman encampments there, Ottoman garrisons. It was a key strategic point during the Yugoslav wars. There are records of a major, undeclared military conflict taking place in that exact valley in the mid-1990s. And then, she tapped the screen, and the historical records vanished, replaced by a single, stark word, redacted. And it's not a government redaction, Fami continued, her voice filled with the thrill of discovery. I've checked the archives of every intelligence agency on the planet. This is a conceptual redaction. The history itself has been eaten. The place is now a hole, a void in the world's memory. It registers on my instruments as a silent scream of non-information. Isn't that just fascinating? Asa felt a chill, a place that had been erased from reality. It sounded too much like the work of a primal fear, too much like the horrors she was desperately trying to escape. But it was Yoru who reacted. Inside Asa's consciousness, the war devil, who had been a whirlwind of cold, tactical analysis, suddenly went utterly still. A tremor went through their shared mind, a jolt of phantom pain so intense Asa gasped and clutched her head. That place, Yoru's mental voice was a choked whisper, strained and full of a confusion that was utterly alien to her nature. I know that valley. A flash of an image, not Asa's memory, but Yoru's, seared through her mind. A sky the color of blood, filled with screaming things that were not birds. The tang of iron and ozone. The feeling of immense, terrible power coursing through limbs that were not her own. The sound of her own laughter, a sound of glorious, terrifying destruction. The memory was a fragment, sharp and painful, and then it was gone, leaving behind a profound, aching emptiness, a sense of loss so vast it was nauseating. We have to go there, Asa said. But it was Yoru's voice that came out of her mouth, a low, guttural command filled with a desperate, ragged urgency. Fami raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her lips curving into a cunning smile. Oh, does the little war devil remember something? Or rather, does she remember forgetting something? We're going, Yoru repeated through Asa, who had scrambled to her feet, her body not entirely her own. Now, Riz, who had been watching the exchange with silent intensity, looked at Naruto. He had finally set the dead leaf aside and was now looking at the map on Fami's tablet. His placid face was, for the first time, etched with a flicker of something that looked like deep concentration. A hole in the collective memory of a species is a significant systemic imbalance, Naruto stated. His voice cutting through the tension. An absence of information on this scale creates instability. It pulls at the edges of adjacent realities. It must be investigated. He stood up. Fami, arrange the transport. The decision was made. They were going to walk into a memory hole, into the heart of a forgotten war, all because a ghost in Asa's head had a phantom pain. Asa's own fear was a small, shrieking thing, completely drowned out by the tidal wave of Yoru's desperate need and Naruto's calm, cosmic certainty. The journey was a descent, not just in altitude, but in tone. They flew from Tokyo to Istanbul on a private jet procured by Fami's bottomless connections, then transferred to a rugged, aging Antonov An-2 biplane, a relic that felt more like a flying tractor than an aircraft. The pilot, a grizzled man with a face like a roadmap of bad decisions and a conspicuous lack of questions, took them into the jagged, limestone peaks of the Dinaric Alps and left them in a grassy clearing, promising to return in 3 days before banking sharply and disappearing back the way he came. The air in the mountains was clean, crisp, and cold. The silence was deep, broken only by the sighing of the wind through pine trees and the distant cry of a hawk. It was a beautiful, wild, and lonely place. As they hiked towards the coordinates Fami had indicated, a strand, GE and subtle shift began to occur in the group's dynamic. The raw, high-strung tension of the post-Makima escape began to mellow into a strange kind of road-weary camaraderie. Riz, liberated from the sterile confines of KOLTS04. Seemed to be drinking in the sensations of the natural world. She ran a hand over the rough bark of a pine tree, her expression one of quiet wonder. She noticed Asa stumbling on a loose rock and, without a word, offered a steadying hand. "Are you all right?" Reese asked, her voice soft. "Yeah, just, not used to all this fresh air and uneven ground," Asa replied, trying for a joke. "In the facility," Reese said, her gaze distant, "all the ground was even. Every corridor was the same length. Every door opened with the same sound. They told me it was for efficiency. To remove distractions." She looked at the sprawling, chaotic vista of mountains around them. "This is very inefficient. I'm starting to think that's a good thing," Asa said, and a flicker of a genuine smile was exchanged between them. They were two girls who had been raised in cages, one of anxiety and guilt, the other of concrete and control, and they were recognizing in each other the same tentative, blinking wonder at their newfound, terrifying freedom. Yoru was a tempest in Asa's mind, a storm of agitation and fragmented memories. "The trees are wrong," she would snarl. There were fewer trees. The ground was black, charred, and the river, it ran red. Asa felt these phantom sensations as faint echoes, a phantom smell of ash on the clean mountain air, a fleeting taste of blood at the back of her throat. It was exhausting. Fami walked with a light, easy grace, occasionally pausing to take readings with a handheld device, her expression one of delighted intellectual curiosity. "The sea, conceptual density is dropping precipitously," she announced cheerfully. "We're approaching the edge of the anomaly. It's like the world is running on a lower resolution here. Fewer unique species of insects. The birdsong is less complex. Fascinating. It's a form of localized informational famine." Naruto led the way, his pace steady and untiring. He moved through the wilderness with a quiet, unobtrusive confidence. His presence not disturbing the environment so much as becoming a part of it. When they reached a chasm that was too wide to jump, he didn't use some grand power. He simply pointed to a massive, half-rotted log further up the slope. "The structural integrity of that fallen tree is sufficient to bear our combined weight. Its position is suboptimal. If we apply force to its base, it will pivot and fall. Creating a bridge, it is the most efficient solution." And so they did, the four of them, a war devil, a famine devil, a bomb hybrid, and a balance devil, working together to they log into place like common laborers, a moment of mundane cooperation in a completely insane situation. After several hours of hiking, they reached the ridge overlooking the valley. And they all stopped. It was not a crater. It was not a blasted wasteland. It was a perfectly ordinary valley, lush and green, with a small river snaking through its center. But the ordinariness was the most profoundly disturbing thing about it. It was too perfect, too generic. The grass was a uniform, textureless green. The trees were all roughly the same shape and size, like placeholders in a digital render. The river flowed with a silent, glassy smoothness, its surface unruffled by wind or rock. There was no sound, no birds, no insects, no rustle of leaves. It was a landscape holding its breath. It was a scar, not of destruction, but of deletion. "This is it," Fami whispered, her usual cheerfulness replaced by a note of genuine awe. As they began their descent into the valley, the effect became more pronounced. "It started subtly. I was just about to say something," Fami said, frowning, a rare look of confusion on her face. "Something about quantum entanglement and its relationship to memory. It was a brilliant point. And now, it's gone. Completely." Reese stopped, her hand going to the grenade pin trigger on her collar. "The pin," she whispered. "It always feels cold, but I can't remember. Did it feel cold yesterday?" Asa felt it too, a creeping mental fog. What was the name of the pilot who flew them here? She had known it a moment ago. Now, her mind was a blank. "Yoru," she projected nervously. "Are you feeling this?" "I feel clearer." Yoru's reply was stark, intense. "The fog in my own mind, the parts that were missing, they're coming back. The emptiness is being filled." And then, the flashbacks began in earnest. No longer just flashes, but sustained, immersive visions that ripped through Asa's consciousness, pulling her under. Flashback. She is immense. She is glorious. She is war. She stands on a mountain of shattered tanks and twisted metal, her true form a magnificent, terrifying symphony of blades, armor, and raw, divine power. The sky is a bruised purple, torn by streaks of sickly green light. The air is thick with the screams of the dying and the triumphant, deafening roar of her own power. This is not a human war. This is a war of concepts, and she is its reigning monarch. Before her, cowering in a trench carved from the very rock, are the last remnants of the Brotherhood of Order, a legion of minor devils and their human contractors who foolishly believed they could impose their rigid, sterile logic on the glorious chaos of conflict. You sought to end war. Her voice booms, a sound that is both a word and an artillery barrage. Fools! War is the engine of change, the forge of strength, the ultimate expression of will. To end war is to end life itself. She raises a hand, and 1,000 spears made of pure, solidified hatred rain down upon the trench, each one finding its mark with perfect, vicious accuracy. The resulting explosion of blood and viscera is, to her, a masterpiece. This is her art. This is her purpose. But as she savors her victory, a shadow falls over her. It is not the shadow of a cloud, but a shadow of doubt. A voice, quiet and insidious, echoes not in the air, but in the space between her thoughts. And what happens when the war is over, sister? She turns. Standing on a nearby peak, untouched by the carnage, is a figure cloaked in shifting, nonsensical patterns, a being whose form hurts the eyes to look upon. The fear of the unknown. The question devil. There is always another war, she snarls, but for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty touches her. But as there, the question devil asks, its voice a tapestry of every question ever asked. Or do you simply repeat the same one, over and over, because you fear what comes after? What is a war devil with no one left to fight? What is the purpose of a sword in a world of plowshares? The questions are not an attack. They are a virus, infecting her certainty, corroding the absolute conviction that is the source of her power. She roars in defiance and lunges at the creature. Her power a tidal wave of destruction. But it is like trying to stab smoke. The questions linger, multiplying, breeding in her mind. End flashback. Asa stumbled, falling to her knees, gasping for breath. The intensity of the memory, the sheer scale of Yoru's power and arrogance, was overwhelming. Yoru. What was that? My past, Yoru whispered, her voice shaking with the force of the retrieved memory. The war before my fall. The reason for it. As they moved deeper into the valley, the phenomenon intensified. Asa, Reese, and Fami grew more forgetful, their recent memories becoming a porous, unreliable haze. Fami, struggling to hold on to a complex thought, actually had to start writing notes on a pad, a profound indignity for a being of her intellect. Conversely, Yoru grew stronger, more substantial in Asa's mind. The gaps in her history were being filled with visions of her epic, forgotten war, and the philosophical onslaught that had been her undoing. She remembered her own name. Not the title given to her by humanity, but her true name, Katha, a name that meant strife and battle in a language long dead. Finally, they reached the center of the valley, by the banks of the silent, glassy river. And there, they saw it. It had no definite shape. It was a shimmering, semi-transparent mass of swirling light and shadow, roughly the size of a house. Within its amorphous form, half-formed images flickered and died. A Roman soldier's face, a snippet of a forgotten folk song, the glint of an Ottoman scimitar, a child's lost toy. It was a creature made of forgotten things, a scavenger of lost memories. As they watched, it pulsed, and Asa felt a fresh wave of forgetfulness wash over her. She momentarily forgot the color of her own apartment walls. The creature seemed to sigh in satisfaction, its form shimmering a little more brightly. This was the memory-eater devil. It turned its non-face towards them, sensing the sudden, rich bounty of memories flooding into Yoru. It saw her not as a girl, but as a walking feast, a library of forgotten lore it desperately craved. It began to drift towards them, a silent, hungry cloud of amnesia. It wants me, Yoru said through Asa, her voice a mixture of defiance and a deep, soul-crushing weariness. It wants my past, all of it. The devil's influence focused on them. Fami grunted and staggered, clutching her head. My name, she muttered, a look of pure panic on her face. My function. What is want? A being defined by a concept was forgetting the concept itself. Reese stood her ground, but her eyes were blank, her tactical knowledge. Her very training, draining away like sand through a sieve. Asa felt her own mind being wiped clean. The faces of her parents, her school, Makima, Naruto, they were all becoming fuzzy. Indistinct labels without meaning. But as her own memories faded, Yoru's became sharper, more painful. Flashback. Katha, the war devil, is on her knees. The valley is a wasteland of her own making. But the victory is ash in her mouth. The question devil looms over her, its form now clearer, more defined, feeding on her doubt. It has not struck a single physical blow. You fight to prove you exist, the voice whispers. But your every victory erases your opponents, leaving you more alone. Your existence is defined by a paradox. To succeed is to render yourself obsolete. Who are you, Katha, when the screaming stops? Quote, her power, once a raging sun, is now a flickering candle. The doubt has become a cancer, eating her from the inside out. She is a concept founded on the certainty of struggle, and that certainty has been shattered. She begins to fade, her immense form becoming translucent, her divine weapons turning to smoke. Better to be forgotten, she whispers, a prayer of surrender, than to exist without purpose. And the universe, in its cruel, literal way, obliges. The Great War is conceptually erased. Her name is forgotten, her history is consumed, her very being is reduced to a fragment, a shadow of a memory, weak enough to be sealed within a mortal vessel, waiting for a day she could never have imagined. End flashback. No, Yoru screamed through Asa, clutching her head as the final, agonizing memory of her own surrender returned. The pain of it, the shame of it, was a force that threatened to tear Asa's mind apart. The memory-eater devil surged forward, sensing its ultimate prize, the core identity of a primal fear. It was about to consume the last vestiges of the war devil, erasing her for good. It was in that moment of ultimate crisis that Naruto, who had been standing perfectly still, his eyes closed, finally acted. He took one step forward, planting himself between the girls and the approaching cloud of amnesia. He did not raise a hand. He did not speak a command. He simply became a focal point. A memory is a stored pattern of information. His voice was calm, clear, and absolute, cutting through the mental fog like a lighthouse beam. Forgetting is the degradation or deletion of that pattern. This creature sustains itself by creating an imbalance, feeding on the information and leaving a void of non-information. The memory-eater devil paused, its advance faltering as it encountered Naruto's aura of perfect equilibrium. It was like a wave hitting a seawall. To destroy it would be to leave the historical void in this valley unfilled. An unstable state, Naruto continued. He opened his eyes, and they seemed to hold the stillness of eternity. To restore the memories to the world would be to reintroduce the chaos of a forgotten, cataclysmic war. Also an unstable state, a new balance is required. He reached out, not physically, but conceptually. He did not target the devil. He targeted the valley. He targeted the very concepts that were in conflict. He took the torrent of memories flooding into Yoru, her history, her power, her pride, her fall, and he didn't suppress it. He wove it into the fabric of the place itself. The formless, generic green of the grass became imbued with the memory of legions. The silent, glassy river began to whisper with the echoes of battle cries. The blank, placeholder trees now stood as silent witnesses to an epic, forgotten tragedy. The valley was no longer empty. It was full of the silent, potent memory of Yoru's war. Then, he turned his conceptual focus to the memory-eater devil. He did not starve it. He did not attack it. He simply gave it a new function. You are a keeper of memory, he stated, his voice reshaping its purpose. You will no longer consume and erase. You will curate and preserve. This valley is now your library. Its memories are your sustenance. You will maintain this place. You will keep its history contained. You will feed on the echoes, and in doing so, you will prevent them from spilling into the outside world. Your hunger and this place's memory are now in perfect, symbiotic balance. The shimmering, amorphous devil stopped its advance. It seemed to consider this. The aggressive, hungry aura it projected softened, replaced by a sense of deep, ancient melancholy. It drifted over to the riverbank and seemed to merge with the landscape, its form becoming a permanent, shimmering heat haze over the water, a guardian of the story the valley now told. The effect was instantaneous. The mental fog lifted from Asa, Fami, and Riz. Their minds were clear again. Fami gasped, looking at her notepad where she had scrawled, "My name is Fami. I am hunger." Riz blinked, the cold weight of her grenade pin trigger a familiar, solid sensation once more. For Asa and Yoru, the change was profound. The chaotic, painful torrent of memories flooding Yoru's mind ceased. The storm was over, but the memories were not gone. Yoru could feel them, not as an open wound inside her, but as the valley around her. She could feel her history in the sigh of the wind, her old power in the solidity of the mountains, her great sorrow in the quiet flow of the river. It was all still there. Her identity restored, but it was anchored, contained, and at peace. She was no longer just a fragment. She was whole again, but her past was no longer a burden she had to carry. It was a place she could visit. Asa fell to the ground, not from pain, but from sheer emotional exhaustion. Yoru was quiet in her mind, a new kind of quiet. Not of frustration or anger, but of a deep, weary, and profound sense of peace. Naruto walked over to Asa and offered her a hand. His face was, as always, placid and unreadable, but his action was simple, direct, and grounding. Asa took his hand, and he effortlessly pulled her to her feet. She looked at him, at this impossible being who had just performed metaphysical surgery on reality itself to save not just their lives, but the very soul of her devil companion. He hadn't just defeated the monster. He had healed the wound that created it. It was an act of such profound and detached compassion that it left her breathless. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling small and inadequate. Yoru, for the first time, added her own voice, not taking over Asa's, but speaking alongside it, a quiet echo in her mind. "Yes, thank you." Naruto simply nodded. "The system is stable," he said. They stood together in the center of the valley, the four of them, a collection of broken and powerful things. But for the first time, they felt less like a random assortment of variables and more like a cohesive unit, bound by the strange, quiet center of their impossible universe. The forgotten war was over, and a new, unspoken peace had begun. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Feast of Emptiness. The city of Prague received them not with open arms, but with a weary, indifferent shrug. It was a city accustomed to ghosts. Its ancient stones were saturated with the echoes of empires, revolutions, and quiet, persistent sorrows. The air itself, thick with the scent of coal smoke, roasting sausage, and the damp chill rising from the Vltava River, seemed to whisper stories the rest of the world had long forgotten. It was the perfect place to disappear, a labyrinth of cobblestone alleys and Gothic spires where, for anomalies in a walking universal constant, could easily be mistaken for just another group of strange, melancholy tourists. Their safe house, another of Fami's acquisitions, was a spacious, dust-sheeted apartment overlooking the old town square. Its high, vaulted ceilings and tall, mullioned windows spoke of a forgotten aristocratic grandeur. From their vantage point, they could see the intricate dance of the astronomical clock, a complex, beautiful machine that measured a time far more romantic and orderly than the one they actually inhabited. For 3 days, a strange, fragile peace settled over the group. It was the quiet of a deep breath taken between a past horror and a future dread. This quiet allowed the subtle changes within the group to become more apparent. Asa and Riz had formed an unlikely, unspoken bond. They would often sit by the large window, not speaking for long stretches, simply watching the crowds below. Asa, with Yoru now a quiet, contemplative presence in her mind rather than a belligerent taskmaster, found herself slowly unclenching muscles she didn't know she'd been holding tense for years. Riz, in turn, was a study in stillness, her former life as a weapon of instant, explosive chaos, making her uniquely appreciative of the simple, profound pleasure of a moment that didn't detonate. She was learning the language of peace from the city's ancient, patient stones. Fami W. As a coiled spring of intellectual energy. The events in the Balkan Valley had provided her with terabytes of new data on Naruto's abilities and philosophy. She had seen him heal a conceptual wound, not by erasing the damage, but by transforming the pain into a permanent, stable monument. It was an act of balance far more sophisticated and elegant than anything she had witnessed before. Her entire saint in him had transcended mere academic curiosity. He was no longer just a fascinating anomaly to be studied. He was the key to a new, grander understanding of existence, and her desire to comprehend him had become the single greatest hunger of her long, voracious life. Naruto remained the group's calm, unwavering center. He spent much of his time reading a collection of Czech fairy tales he'd found on a dusty bookshelf, his placid blue eyes tracing the strange, dark logic of the stories. To him, the narratives of woodcutters, water sprites, and cruel kings were no different from the quantum mechanic's textbook or the samurai's treatise. They were all just systems of information, sets of rules governing a particular reality. He was simply learning the local physics. On the evening of the third day, as the setting sun painted the spires of the tin church in hues of bruised orange and deep purple, Fami made her move. She found Naruto standing by the open window, observing the clockwork Ostals making their hourly procession on the astronomical clock below. "A beautiful system," she said, her voice a soft melody that wove itself into the evening air. "Each part has its function. Death rings the bell. Vanity admires himself in a mirror. Greed clutches his bag of gold. They tell a story of human imbalance, all contained within a perfectly balanced, predictable mechanism. A paradox you must appreciate." Naruto did not turn. "The mechanism is balanced," he acknowledged. "The story it tells is a reminder of the constant potential for imbalance. It serves as a regulatory warning. Its function is efficient." Fami moved to stand beside him, the scent of ozone and distant stars seeming to cling to her. "I have a place I wish to show you, Naruto. A place where my own philosophy is the governing mechanism. Not an experiment performed on a field of tasteless corn, but my own home. My own pantry, if you will. It is a place of pure concept, and I believe it would be illustrative for our continued discussions." Asa and Rize, sitting nearby, both tensed. The casual invitation felt laden with a significance that made the air in the room grow heavy. "You want to take him to your personal dimension?" Rize asked, her voice flat, the quiet suspicion of a trained operative surfacing. "Why?" Fami's ringed eyes sparkled with amusement. "Because I wish to have a true debate, my dear Bomb. Here, in this world, we are constrained by its messy, arbitrary rules. I wish to show Naruto my worldview not as a description, but as a direct, immersive experience. It is the only way for him to truly understand the proposition I am about to make." She turned her full attention back to Naruto, her gaze intense and unwavering. "It is an invitation. Will you accept?" Yoru's voice was a sharp hiss in Asa's mind. "Don't do it. It's a trap. In her own realm, a devil's power is absolute. She is famine. She could make him feel a hunger so vast it would unmake him." But Naruto simply turned his head and looked at Fami. He saw her not as a threat, but as a variable presenting a new set of data. She was offering him access to her core operating system. For a being who sought to understand all systems, it was an irresistible offer. "I will accept your invitation," he said. Fami's smile was triumphant. She held out her hand. "Then take my hand. There are no doors to my home. Only a change in perspective." Naruto placed his hand in hers. Her skin was cool, like polished marble. He did not brace himself. He did not prepare. He simply waited. Fami closed her eyes. The world did not dissolve or shatter. It simply fell away. The scent of coal smoke was replaced by the smell of dry dust and brittle longing. The sound of the city square faded into a profound, humming silence. The soft, warm light of the setting sun vanished, and Asa and Rize found themselves suddenly alone in the vast, darkening apartment. The space where Naruto and Fami had stood was now empty. They had not walked through a portal. They had simply ceased to be there. Naruto opened his eyes to a sky the color of a day-old bruise. It was a vast, empty canvas, devoid of sun, moon, or stars. The only feature was a shimmering, distant heat haze on the horizon that took the form of a magnificent, impossible feast, gleaming platters of roasted meats, mountains of glistening fruits, rivers of dark, rich wine. It was a mirage of perfect satisfaction, radiating a promise of fulfillment that was so potent it was almost a physical force, yet it gave off no light and no warmth. It was a painting of a sun in a world without heat. He stood on a plain of fine, white granules that stretched to the horizon in every direction. It looked like salt, or sand, but as he looked closer, he saw that each microscopic grain was a tiny, perfectly formed, silently screaming mouth. The entire landscape was a desert of infinitesimal, unvoiced want. A sluggish, viscous river of what looked like dark, thick syrup cut through the plain, flowing from nowhere to nowhere. He knelt and dipped a finger into it. It was odorless, tasteless, and possessed a cloying thickness. It had the texture of sustenance, but none of the substance. This was Fami's realm, her pantry, a pocket dimension crafted from the pure, undiluted essence of her being. It was a monument to want, a landscape of eternal, unfulfilled desire. Fami stood before him, but she was different here. Her form was less solid, more majestic. She seemed taller, her hair floating around her as if underwater, her ringed eyes glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. Here, she was not just a devil. She was a law of physics. She was the god of this empty, hungry place. "Welcome, Naruto," she said, her voice echoing in the humming silence. Here, her words had weight, shaping the very air around them. "Welcome to my truth. This is the fundamental state of all sentient existence, stripped of its distractions. A vast emptiness, a gnawing hunger, and the beautiful, tortuous, unreachable promise of satisfaction." Naruto stood up, brushing the screaming mouth salt from his fingers. He surveyed the landscape with his calm, analytical gaze. He was not horrified. He was not intimidated. He was intrigued. A closed system designed to perpetuate a negative feedback loop, he observed, his voice as steady here as it was in the real world. The mirage of the feast creates want. The desert of mouths embodies that want. The river of false sustenance mocks it. It is a self-sustaining engine of misery. The design is elegant, though its purpose is inefficient. Fami laughed, a sound like shattering glass and chiming bells. Inefficient. My dear Naruto, its purpose is truth. And the truth is that all of life's struggles, all of art, all of love, all of war, they are just elaborate distractions from this. From the fundamental emptiness, the gnawing void in the heart of everything. I do not create this hunger. I merely reveal it. I strip away the lies. She began to walk, and he walked with her. Their feet leaving no prints in the desert of mouths. "Look at the world we just left," she said, gesturing to the bruised sky as if it were a cinema screen. "Humanity starves on a full belly. They have everything they could ever need: food, shelter, technology. And yet, are they satisfied? No. They hunger for more. More power, more fame, more love, more life. They are drowning in a sea of fulfillment. And they are dying of thirst. Their suffering is a design flaw. A deep, cosmic imbalance." They came to the bank of the syrupy river. Fami dipped her hand in and pulled out a perfect, glistening red apple, formed from the viscous liquid. It was a flawless object, the platonic ideal of an apple. "This is my grand proposition, Naruto," she said, her voice resonating with a primal, ancient power. "You and I, balance and famine. We are two sides of the same, ultimate coin. You seek equilibrium. I understand the ultimate source of all disequilibrium, want. Together, we could solve it. We could bring about the final, true, perfect peace." Her ringed eyes, glowing with zealous fervor, locked onto his. "Imagine it. We could traverse the universe, system by system, world by world. We would not destroy. We would not kill. We would simply adjust. We would perform the same procedure as in Hokkaido, but on a universal scale. We would sever the flawed, painful connection between need and desire. We would leave the function, but remove the passion. A universe of beings who eat without pleasure, procreate without love, work without ambition, live without fear, and die without regret. A perfect, silent, functional machine. A universe free from the agony of want. A universe in perfect, passionless, eternal balance. My famine, guided by your balance. It would be our gift. Our salvation." She offered him the apple, a proxy for the entire universe. "Join me. Help me create a world without hunger. Let us be its saviors." This was her ultimate test, her ultimate temptation. She was offering him a twisted reflection of his own purpose. An end to all struggle. A final, absolute equilibrium. It was the famine devil's gospel, the ultimate siren song of nothingness. Naruto looked from the perfect, false apple in her hand to her luminous, pleading eyes. He was silent for a long moment, the humming of the empty realm the only sound. "The system you propose is not one of balance," he said finally. his voice cutting through her grand vision like a surgeon's scalpel. It is a system of absolute nullity. You mistake stillness for stability. He looked away from her, towards the shimmering mirage on the horizon. The engine of existence is driven by a duality. Positive and negative, light and dark, creation and destruction, want and fulfillment. These are not flaws. They are the twin poles of the battery that powers reality. A world with only want is a world of eternal, screaming friction. But a world with neither want nor fulfillment is a world where the engine has been switched off. It is not balanced. It is simply over. He turned back to her. You see suffering and wish to delete its cause. I see suffering and identify it as a symptom of a systemic imbalance that needs correction, not deletion. You wish to euthanize the patient to cure the disease. I wish to heal the patient by restoring the body's natural equilibrium. Fami's glowing face faltered, a flicker of doubt in her divine certainty. But the pain, the endless, pointless struggle. The struggle is not pointless, Naruto countered. The pain of hunger is what makes the satisfaction of a meal a meaningful event. The pain of loneliness is what gives love its value. The fear of death is what gives life its precious, fleeting urgency. These are not bugs in the system, Fami. They are its primary features. To remove them would be to render the entire experience meaningless. He gently pushed her hand away, the perfect apple dissolving back into the thick, joyless syrup of the river. He had refused her gospel. He had rejected her utopia of emptiness. Fami stared at him, her divine confidence finally cracking, revealing the ancient, lonely being beneath. Then what is your solution? She whispered, her voice losing its echo, becoming small and fragile. If not this, then what? How do you balance a universe that is designed to suffer? Naruto did not answer with words. He knelt down, placing his open palm flat against the ground, against the infinite, silently screaming mouths of the salt desert. He did not channel a wave of power. He did not seek to override her realm. He did something small, something precise. He introduced a single, new variable into her closed system. Where his palm touched the ground, a small circle of the salt, about the size of a dinner plate, stopped screaming. The microscopic mouths closed. The white granules darkened, turning into rich, fertile soil. And from that soil, a single, tiny green shoot emerged. Fami watched, mesmerized, as the shoot grew with an unnatural speed. It became a small patch of lush, green grass. A few tiny, white flowers bloomed. An insect, a small, buzzing bee, materialized from nowhere and began to collect nectar from the flowers. The grass swayed, not in a wind, but with a vibrant, living energy. It was a tiny, impossible island of life in her vast ocean of sterile want. What is this? She breathed, her voice filled with awe. This is balance, Naruto said, his hand still on the ground. This grass feels the want of the sun, and so it grows towards the sky. The flower feels the want of procreation, and so it offers nectar to the bee. The bee feels the want of hunger, and so it takes the nectar, and in doing so, it pollinates the flower, fulfilling its desire. The grass will grow old. It will wither and die. It will decompose and become nourishment for the soil, fulfilling the soil's want for nutrients so that new grass can grow. He lifted his hand. The patch of grass remained, a vibrant, self-contained, self-perpetuating system, a perfect, tiny loop of want and fulfillment, of life and death, of struggle and satisfaction. It did not erase the hunger of her realm. It existed within it, a testament to a different way. You seek to create a universe without want, Naruto said, standing up. I seek a universe where every want has a corresponding, achievable fulfillment. A universe of countless, interconnected, dynamic equilibriums. Your system is a silent, static desert. Mine is a living, breathing ecosystem. Both can be seen as a form of balance. But only one of them is life. Fami stared at the patch of grass. She knelt, reaching out a tentative, trembling hand to touch a single, perfect blade. It felt real, alive. It was the most beautiful and most terrifying thing she had ever seen. For millennia, she had seen existence as a vast, cosmic hunger. A zero-sum game of taking and wanting. He had just shown her, in a single, elegant gesture, a system that created meaning and value from nothing. A system that thrived on the very duality she sought to destroy. Her entire philosophy, the very foundation of her being, crumbled into dust. She looked at Naruto, at his calm, placid face. And she felt a new sensation, something for which she had no name. It was not the gnawing emptiness of hunger, nor was it the fleeting spike of satisfaction. It was a profound, soul-shaking sense of awe, a feeling of having been shown a truth so vast and so beautiful that it dwarfed her own reality. It was a form of intellectual and emotional fulfillment so complete that it was almost painful. For the first time, Fami, the famine devil, felt truly, completely, sated. And it was a feeling directed entirely at him. Her luminous, divine form wavered, becoming solid and human again. The bruised sky above them began to thin, and the scent of Prague, of coal and history and life, began to bleed back into the sterile air. Her realm, unable to sustain itself against the sheer, undeniable truth of his little patch of grass, was collapsing. "I see," she whispered, her voice just the voice of a girl, stripped of all its divine power. The world snapped back into place. They were standing in the apartment again, the last rays of sun casting long shadows across the floor. Reese and Asa were on their feet, their expressions a mixture of fear and relief. To them, only a second had passed. Fami stumbled, and for the first time, Naruto reached out and steadied her, his hand on her arm. She looked up at him, her ringed eyes, no longer glowing, filled with a new, raw, and vulnerable light. Her intellectual fascination had been shattered and reforged into something far deeper, far more personal. She had wanted to understand him. Now, she felt an entirely new, all-consuming hunger, the desire to be near him. To learn from him, to exist within the profound, life-affirming balance that he embodied. She had invited him to her feast of emptiness, hoping to convert him. Instead, he had shown her the meaning of a single blade of grass, and in doing so, had captured her completely. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. A Symphony of Detonation. Lyon was a city set ablaze with cold fire. For 4 nights every December, during the Fête des Lumières, the city shed its skin of stoic, workaday stone and donned a flickering costume of pure light. It was a celebration of defiance against the winter darkness, a tradition that had evolved from placing candles in windows to ward off plague into a high-tech, international spectacle of art and wonder. Every building was a canvas, every square a stage. Projections swam across the face of the Cathédrale Saint-Jean, transforming its Gothic arches into a cascading waterfall of stars. The fountain at the Place des Jacobins was frozen in a sheath of pulsing blue light, making the water seem like captured lightning. The air, crisp and cold, tasted of mulled wine, roasting chestnuts, and the collective, joyful gasp of a million spectators. It was, in short, a system of beautiful, chaotic, and profoundly human imbalance. From a stone balcony overlooking the Saône River, where barges draped in shimmering lights drifted like lazy comets, the small group observed the spectacle. It had been Fami's suggestion. Makima will be marshalling her forces, she had explained with the detached air of a grandmaster explaining a predictable chess opening. She will attempt to cut us off, to isolate us. Her intelligence network is formidable, but it is centralized. A city in the midst of a massive, chaotic public festival is the most difficult environment for her hounds to operate in. We will be a single, strange ripple in an ocean of them. It is the most logical place to be. For once, her logic had led them to a place of breathtaking beauty. Asa Mitaka, bundled in a thick coat she'd bought from a street market, leaned against the cold stone, a cup of hot chocolate warming her hands. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt normal. The lights were pretty. The hot chocolate was sweet. The constant, low-grade hum of existential terror that had become her life's soundtrack was momentarily drowned out by the cheerful din of the crowd. Yoru, a silent partner since the valley, seemed to be observing the festival with a kind of detached, artistic appreciation, analyzing the strategic use of light and shadow, the control of mass psychology. The weaponization of joy, as she termed it. It was a peaceful coexistence, and Asa cherished it with the desperation of a starving woman given a single crust of bread. Fami stood a little ways apart, her sharp, analytical gaze flitting from the light displays to Naruto, who stood at the edge of the balcony, looking down at the river. She was cataloging his reactions, or rather, his lack thereof. He watched the festival with the same placid intensity with which he had watched the starving farmers, the dying devil, and the warring concepts. To him, this explosion of human creativity was simply another system to be perceived, its variables of light, sound, and emotion to be logged and understood. Fami had taken to carrying a small, leather-bound notebook, in which she would occasionally jot down an observation, a habit that Asa found both ridiculous and deeply unsettling. It was Reese who was the most captivated, and the most haunted. She stood utterly still, her green eyes wide, reflecting the thousand shifting lights of the city. For a girl who had spent her life in gray, functional concrete boxes, this riot of color and form was an overwhelming sensory feast. But every flash of a strobe light was the ghost of an explosion. Every cheer from the crowd held the echo of a scream. Each burst of light was a beautiful nightmare, a reminder of the terrible, explosive power that lay coiled beneath her skin, tethered to the grenade pin on her collar. She was the bomb devil at a festival of lights, a shark at a swimming competition. She was both perfectly at home and terrifyingly out of place. "It's pretty, isn't it?" Asa said softly, moving to stand beside her. Reese jumped slightly, startled out of her reverie. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "It is loud. The light. In a good way, I think," Asa offered. Reese nodded, but her gaze was fixed on a particularly brilliant display where fireworks, launched from a barge, bloomed in the night sky. Silent flowers of fire. She felt a phantom ache in her bones, the familiar, Pavlovian craving to unleash her own, far more permanent, flowers of destruction. It was an addiction she was only now realizing she had. The addiction to her own nature. It was then that the ambiance of the festival shifted. It was a change so subtle only those attuned to the harmonics of violence would have noticed it. The cheerful chaos of the crowd began to feel directed. A group of street performers dressed as silver statues suddenly seemed less like artists and more like sentinels. A knot of laughing students pushing through the crowd moved with a little too much purpose. A shadow in a doorway detached itself from the deeper shadows and began to move. The wolves were closing in. Asa, Yoru's voice was a razor blade in her mind. Sharp and cold. "We're being herded. Look, 10 o'clock. 2 of them. 3 more at the bottom of the stairs. They're professionals." Reese felt it too. The hairs on her arms stood on end. Her body, trained for years to recognize the subtle tells of an ambush, went rigid. The festival's joyful noise suddenly sounded like a predator's roar. Fami sighed, closing her notebook with a soft snap. "Well, that didn't take them long. Not Makima's people, though. Their movements are too direct, too kinetic. These are old-world players. How brutish." Naruto turned from the river, his placid expression unchanged. He had felt the shift in the system's dynamics, the introduction of a new, hostile intent. 8 figures, clad in dark, inconspicuous winter clothing, had formed a loose, inescapable cordon around them on the crowded promenade. They moved with a chilling, fluid synergy, using the ebb and flow of the civilian crowd as a current to drift them closer. One of them, a man with a face like a block of frozen granite and dead, gray eyes, met Reese's gaze. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of acquisition. "Reese," Asa whispered, her voice tight with panic. "Who are they?" "My handlers." Reese's reply was a dead, flat thing, a voice from a tomb. "The Union. They've come for their property." The man with the granite face spoke. His voice not loud, but carrying with a chilling clarity over the din. He spoke in Russian, the words like chips of ice. "Subject 07. The director sends his regards. Your unauthorized vacation is over. Come quietly, and we will not be forced to damage the merchandise." The words, Subject 07, were a key turning in a lock deep inside Reese. Her posture changed. The tentative softness she had been cultivating vanished, replaced by the cold, lethal poise of a weapon. Her hand drifted towards her collar. One of the other agents raised a device, a matte black box that hummed with a low, dissonant frequency that grated on the teeth. As he aimed it at their group, Asa felt Yoru's presence in her mind flicker, as if a bad connection was getting worse. "Anti-devil field," Fami noted with clinical detachment. "A crude but effective application of frequency manipulation. It disrupts the connection between a devil and its host, or the stability of a hybrid's fusion." "An annoyance," The agents began to advance. Their intention clear. This was a snatch and grab. They were here for Reese, and the rest of them were just acceptable collateral damage. The crowd, oblivious, continued to laugh and cheer. Their joy a surreal soundtrack to the silent, deadly confrontation. Reese looked at Naruto. Her green eyes were wide with a silent, desperate plea. She was asking him to save her, to do what he did best. To step in and balance the situation. To turn them into inert matter or negate their aggression with a wave of his hand. But Naruto did not move to attack. He did not raise a hand. He simply placed his palm flat against the cold stone of the balcony's balustrade. And the world held its breath. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The dissonant hum of the anti-devil device died. Its internal mechanics ceasing to function as the concept of disruption was locally negated. The panicked, surging motion of the crowd immediately around them stilled, not with fear, but with a sudden, inexplicable calm. The laughing students, the silver statues, the everyday civilians, they all paused, their movements slowing as if trapped in thick honey, their attention drawn away from the confrontation by a sudden, shared, and utterly compelling interest in a light display on a distant building. Naruto had not created a barrier of force. He had created a barrier of disinterest. He had edited the local reality to give them a clear, unobserved stage. Then, he looked at Reese. His deep blue eyes held no command, no pity, no instruction. They held only a calm, profound, and absolute trust. The choice is yours, Reese, he said, his voice quiet but clear in the sudden pocket of stillness. You can revert to your programming. You can embrace your new potential. You can flee. You can fight. Whatever you decide, whatever the outcome, I will balance the consequences. He was not offering to fight her battle. He was offering her something far more precious, something she had never had in her entire life, a choice. A real choice, with a safety net built from the fabric of reality itself. He was giving her agency. The granite-faced man, seeing his device fail, snarled an order in Russian. The agents drew weapons, suppressed pistols, long, thin knives coated in a dark substance. They moved in, fast and silent. This was the moment, the turning point. A hurricane of conflicting emotions raged within Reese. The cold, clean logic of her training screamed at her to kill them all. Explode. End the threat. It was the simplest, most efficient solution. It was what she was built for. The fire began to build in her chest, the familiar, exhilarating rush of power calling to her like a lover. One pull, one detonation, a clean, satisfying blast that would reduce them all to demist and silence the voices of her past forever. But then, she looked at Naruto's quiet, expectant face. He wasn't judging her. He wasn't pushing her. He was simply waiting for her to decide who she was. She thought of Ace's awkward, genuine smile. She thought of the simple, honest taste of the ramen in Shinjuku, a pleasure she had chosen for herself. She thought of the wind in the Balkan mountains, a feeling of wildness and freedom. These were small, inefficient, illogical things. But they were hers. Her hand, which had been moving to the grenade pin, stopped. Her fingers, which had been curling into a fist of fury, slowly, deliberately, uncurled. She looked at the advancing agents, at their dead eyes and their cold weapons, and she saw not a threat, but a pathetic, sad cage she had just escaped. She raised her hands, not in surrender, not in aggression. She raised them like a conductor stepping up to a podium, ready to command an orchestra. A slow smile, the first genuine, joyful smile Asa had ever seen on her face, spread across her lips. You wanted a bomb, she whispered, her voice filled with a newfound power, a power that came not from her programming, but from her choice. I'll give you a symphony. And she unleashed it. It started with a single, soft pop and a shower of brilliant green sparks that rained down around the first agent, causing him to slip and fall. Then, a series of small, percussive explosions, no louder than firecrackers, detonated in perfect, rhythmic succession at the feet of the other agents, not harming them, but throwing their advance into chaos, making them trip over each other like clumsy dancers. From her fingertips, she launched a stream of what looked like tiny, glowing comets. They swirled through the air, weaving a complex, beautiful pattern of light before plastering themselves onto the agents' weapons, where they erupted not with force, but with a thick, fast-hardening adhesive foam, gluing their guns to their hands and their knives to their sheaths. The granite-faced leader, realizing what was happening, lunged at her, his face a mask of fury. Reese simply pirouetted out of his way with a dancer's grace, and as he stumbled past, she touched 2 fingers to his back. A localized, contained blast, more a concussive shove than an explosion, sent him flying headfirst into a large, ornamental planter, where he lay dazed and groaning amidst a flurry of dirt and decorative ferns. Then came the finale. Reese threw her head back and thrust her hands towards the sky. A torrent of light and sound erupted from her, a controlled, vertical explosion of breathtaking beauty. It was a firework display more magnificent than anything the festival had produced. Rockets of pure, shimmering gold spiraled into the air, bursting into peonies of sapphire blue and chrysanthemums of emerald green. Crackling, silver starbursts rained down in a gentle, harmless cascade. The roar was not a deafening, destructive blast, but a deep, resonant, and strangely musical chord that vibrated in the bones. The crowd, their attention released from Naruto's influence, gasped and cheered, thinking it was a surprise and scheduled part of the festival. They pointed their phones at the sky, capturing the beautiful, impossible spectacle. The incapacitated agents could only lie on the ground, disarmed and bewildered, as a shower of soft, glowing embers settled around them, a beautiful, humiliating testament to their failure. Reese had used the power of the bomb devil, the fear of sudden, violent death, and she had transformed it into a moment of collective wonder and joy. She had not destroyed, she had created. She was not the bomb. She was the artist who commanded the detonation. As the last golden firework faded into the night sky, leaving a lingering scent of ozone and triumph in the air, a profound silence fell over their small group. Reese stood panting slightly, her body thrumming with the afterglow of her power, her face flushed with exertion and exhilaration. She looked at Asa, who was staring at her with wide-eyed, utter astonishment. She looked at Fami, who was actually clapping softly, a look of genuine appreciation on her face. And then she looked at Naruto. He was watching her, his face holding the same placid calm, but she could see it in his deep blue eyes. A quiet, profound approval. He had given her the stage, and he was appreciating her performance. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her knees washed over her. It was a tidal wave of gratitude, of relief, of a fierce, protective loyalty, and of something else. Something warm and explosive that was blooming in her chest. She walked towards him, her footsteps unsteady. She walked through the lingering, magical smoke of her own creation until she was standing directly in front of him. She reached up with both hands, grabbed the front of his black turtleneck, and pulled his face down to hers. Her lips met his not with tenderness or hesitation, but with the force of a detonation. It was a desperate, passionate, and explosive kiss, a release of a lifetime of pain, of control, of silence. It tasted of cordite, freedom, and 1,000 words she didn't know how to say. It was a thank you. It was a declaration. It was her own, personal, and perfectly controlled symphony. For a moment, the world stopped. The cheering crowds, the shimmering lights, the defeated agents, it all faded away, leaving only the two of them in the epicenter of their own quiet, profound explosion. When she finally pulled away, breathless, the spell was broken. Asa was staring, her mouth slightly agape, her face bright red. Yoru was letting out a low, appreciative whistle in her mind. Fami had a single eyebrow arched, a sharp, analytical glint in her eyes as she observed this new, fascinating, and highly volatile imbalance in their social dynamic. Reese looked up at Naruto, whose placid expression was, for the very first time, touched with a flicker of something that might have been surprise. She had finally done it. She had finally created an explosion that he hadn't seen coming. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Devil in the Details. The new safe house was an attic apartment nestled under the steep, slate-tiled eaves of a centuries-old building in Oxford. The city's dreaming spires, those monuments to human ambition and intellectual order, were visible through the gabled windows, piercing a sky the color of dishwater. The air in the apartment smelled of old paper, leather bindings, and faint, academic dust. Books were everywhere, not arranged neatly on shelves, but stacked in precarious, teetering towers on the floor, on chairs, on every available surface. It was a space that had been curated by a chaotic, obsessive intellect, which made it Fami's choice of refuge both ironic and deeply fitting. For a full day after their arrival from Lyon, a new and highly volatile element had been introduced into their group's ecosystem: awkwardness. It was a thick, syrupy silence, a stark contrast to the quiet, companionable peace they had found before. The source of this imbalance was, of course, the memory of Rize's kiss, an event that now seemed to hang in the air like a visible, shimmering heat haze. Rize herself had retreated into a shell of silence. She sat cross-legged on a worn Persian rug, painstakingly cleaning a collection of handguns she'd taken from Fami's apparently bottomless arsenal. Her movements were as precise and economical as ever, but her focus was internal. The explosive confidence she had displayed on the balcony in Lyon had cooled, leaving behind a fragile, uncertain vulnerability. She had made a choice, a bold, passionate, unprecedented move, and now she was adrift in the unfamiliar territory of its consequences, with no training manual to guide her. Asa, feeling an empathetic pang of secondhand embarrassment, tried to bridge the gap. She brought Rize a cup of tea, setting it down carefully on the floor. "That was quite a fireworks show you put on," Asa began, her voice a little too bright. Rize didn't look up from the pistol slide she was polishing. "It was a non-lethal application of kinetic and pyrotechnic dispersal," she stated, the words sounding like a clinical report. It was a retreat into the language of her old life. "Right, well, the kiss was pretty explosive too," Asa mumbled, then immediately winced. "I mean, not that. I just mean it was a surprise. A good surprise, I think, for you. Was it?" Rize finally looked up, her green eyes wide and haunted. "I do not know," she whispered, and the simple, honest confession was more telling than any explanation. It was an action taken without a strategic objective. It was inefficient. She had used the language of their strange little world, the language of systems and balance, to describe an act of pure, unbalanced passion. The contradiction seemed to pain her. Fami, perched on a stack of encyclopedias like a raven on a branch, found the entire situation delicious. On the contrary, she chimed in, her voice laced with analytical amusement. It was a highly efficient exchange of emotional data, a non-verbal declaration of a shift in allegiance and emotional investment. The resulting surge in oxytocin and dopamine in your system, Rize, would have temporarily overridden your combat-oriented programming, while the corresponding shock and novelty of the event served to disrupt the cognitive processing of every other observer. As a tactical maneuver in the war for social dominance within this unit, it was ruthlessly effective. "I'm taking notes." She scribbled something in the small leather notebook she now carried everywhere. Asa shot her a venomous glare. "Can you please not narrate our lives like you're a nature documentarian observing a pack of weird, emotionally stunted wolves?" Asa snapped. "But that's precisely what we are," Fami replied cheerfully. "And I am merely the humble chronicler of our fascinatingly dysfunctional ecosystem." All this time, Naruto had been sitting in a worn armchair by the window, engrossed in a dense, intimidating book titled, An Introduction to Linguistic Semiotics. He had been a silent, unmoving island in the churning sea of their social anxiety. Rize finally looked at him, her expression pleading, as if seeking a final judgment that would put her out of her misery. "Was it an imbalance?" she asked him, her voice barely audible. Naruto placed a thin slip of paper to mark his page and closed the book, the soft thud of it seeming unnaturally loud. He considered her question with the same serious, detached gravity he might apply to a problem in theoretical physics. "An action is only an imbalance if it disrupts the system's potential for equilibrium," he stated, his voice calm and even. "Your previous state was one of repressed desire and enforced function, a state of high internal imbalance. Your action was a release of that systemic pressure. A chaotic, but necessary, realignment of your personal variables." He paused, his deep blue eyes meeting hers. "It was an unexpected data point. The system is processing. No further action is required at this time." The sheer, deadpan absurdity of his analysis, of being told that her passionate kiss was an unexpected data point, that the system was processing, was so bizarre that it broke the tension completely. Rize stared at him, then a small, choked sound escaped her. It was a laugh. A real, genuine laugh. Asa found herself smiling, the awkwardness dissolving in the face of Naruto's absolute, unshakable strangeness. He hadn't dismissed her feelings or validated them, he had simply accepted them as new information and filed them away. For Rize, who had lived her life as a tool defined by her function, being treated as a complex data-producing system was the most respectful and reassuring response imaginable. It was into this newly re-stabilized atmosphere that Fami introduced the next catastrophe. This foray into interpersonal dynamics has been delightful, she announced, tapping at the screen of her tablet. I'm afraid I've detected a new, and far more insidious, form of imbalance. Not a hunger for food, or a lust for war, but a hunger for truth. She turned the tablet so they could all see. It displayed a complex, shifting star chart of global information flow. Most of the network was a steady, humming blue. But a single point, centered over the United Kingdom, was pulsing with a sickly, violet light. There are discrepancies, Fami explained, her voice losing its usual cheerfulness and taking on a sharper, more focused edge. Minor, almost undetectable corruptions in the global data stream, all originating from this city. For example, according to the official records of the Nobel Foundation as of 3 hours ago, the 1962 prize for medicine was awarded to a drive Alistair Finch for his discovery of the K-synthesis pathway in cellular mitosis. Okay, Asa said, not following. Dr. Alistair Finch never existed, Fami continued, her ringed eyes narrowed. And the K-synthesis pathway is a biological fiction. 3 hours and 1 minute ago, the prize was correctly attributed to Crick, Watson, and Wilkins for the discovery of DNA. The change was instantaneous, retroactive, and has already begun propagating. Wikipedia has been updated. Digital academic archives are rewriting themselves. In a few hours, the world's collective memory will have seamlessly accepted this new, false information as fact. A cold dread trickled down Asa's spine. What could do that? Something that doesn't eat flesh, or fear, or memory, Fami murmured, her fascination warring with a clear sense of intellectual revulsion. Something that eats facts. It revises reality, not by destroying it, but by editing it. A line at a time. It was Yoru who provided the next piece of the puzzle. Her voice resonated in Asa's mind, low and grim. The Napoleonic Wars. I was there, not as I am now, but I was a force. A concept sweeping through the armies. I remember the Battle of Fuentes de Oñoro. The British 7th Division, caught in the open, saved by a desperate, suicidal charge of the King's German Legion cavalry. A glorious, pointless display of valor. It is one of my clearest memories of that era. Asa relayed this to the group. Fami's fingers flew across her tablet. After a moment, she looked up, her face pale. According to every historical record available on any network, military archives, academic journals, personal diaries digitized by the university here, that cavalry charge never happened. The 7th Division was surrounded and surrendered. The battle was a decisive French victory. Yoru let out a silent scream of rage and violation in Asa's head. It wasn't just a fact that had been changed. Her memory, her personal experience of history, had been invalidated. Someone was not just rewriting the world, they were plagiarizing her past. The university, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the rising panic. The Bodleian Library. It is one of the oldest and largest repositories of information on the planet. A nexus of stored, stable data. If there is a nest, it will be there. The library was less a building and more a small nation dedicated to the worship of the written word. Its ancient stone walls seemed to groan under the weight of accumulated knowledge. Inside, the air was cool and still, smelling of vellum, decaying paper, and the faint, sharp scent of bookbinding glue. The main reading room was a cathedral of silence, its vaulted ceiling soaring into darkness. Its stained glass windows casting long, jewel-toned fingers of light across rows of students bent over their books with monastic devotion. The only sound was the rustle of turning pages and the occasional soft cough. A sound that seemed to be instantly absorbed by the sheer density of quiet. They split up, a small team of conceptual saboteurs in a fortress of human knowledge. Fami, producing. GA flawless university faculty ID from her wallet, sat down at a restricted terminal in the Digital Humanities department, her fingers a blur as she dove into the library's deep network, tracking the source of the data corruption like a shark following a single drop of blood in the ocean. Asa, with Yoru as her grim, internal guide, headed for the historical archives. She pulled a heavy, leather-bound volume on the Peninsular War from the shelves. As she read the account of Fuentes de Oñoro, Yoru's fury was a burning pressure behind her eyes. It's wrong, the war devil snarled. Every sentence is a lie. The formations are wrong. The timeline is wrong. He's turned a bloody, chaotic struggle for survival into a neat, tidy tactical diagram where my side loses. It's an insult to the very nature of war. Reese, using the stealth skills ingrained in her by the Union, slipped past a dozing guard and into the deep stacks, the restricted, climate-controlled archives where the oldest and most valuable manuscripts were kept. She moved like a ghost through the narrow, high-walled corridors of books, the silence here even more profound, the air cold as a tomb. Naruto simply walked. He wandered through the vast halls, his hands in his pockets, his placid gaze sweeping over the endless rows of books. He was not reading the titles. He was sensing the structure beneath them. He could feel it now, a subtle, dissonant hum in the fabric of the library's reality. A place where information was not stable, where truth was not a constant, but a fluctuating, editable variable. It was a deep, fundamental wrongness. A flaw in the system's code. Reese was the one who found the heart of the anomaly. In a forgotten sub-basement, a dusty, cobweb-choked chamber filled with piles of uncatalogued parchments, she saw it. A single, ornate lectern stood in the center of the room. On it rested a massive, ancient tome bound in what looked like human skin. And leaning over it was a figure. It was tall and thin, dressed in the tattered, ink-stained robes of a medieval scribe. Its form was unstable, shimmering and indistinct, as if it were a poorly resolved photograph. Its hands were long, spidery claws made of solidified, dripping ink. And in one of them, it held a glowing quill. Its face was a featureless expanse of blank parchment, upon which words and diagrams would occasionally flicker and fade. The palimpsest devil, it was leaning over the ancient book, its glowing quill scratching silently across a page. Reese crept closer and saw that the book was a detailed account of the Black Death in Europe. The devil was not writing new words, but tracing over the old ones. As its quill passed over a line detailing the death toll in Florence, the number 90,000 flickered and resolved into a 900. With a small, satisfied sigh, the creature moved on, its edits turning a history of catastrophic plague into a minor, localized outbreak. It wasn't destroying the book, it was improving it, softening the harsh edges of history. Making the story more palatable. Just as Reese was about to signal the others, she felt a change in the air behind her. A presence, cold, deliberate, and suffused with an aura of absolute, unshakable control. A fascinating creature, isn't it? A soft, melodic voice said from the shadows. Such a useful tool for anyone wishing to create a better world. Reese spun around, her body dropping into a defensive crouch. Makima emerged from the darkness, a serene, knowing smile on her face. She was not alone. The stoic, grim-faced Aki Hayakawa stood at her side, his hand on his katana. And hovering silently behind them, its multitude of eyes closed, its form radiating a terrifying, holy power, was the angel devil. At that moment, the others arrived, drawn by the sudden, massive spike of devil energy. Fami appeared at the top of the stone steps, Naruto just behind her. Asa and Yoru, her face a mask of fury, were right on their heels. The small, dusty chamber was suddenly very, very crowded. The palimpsest devil looked up from its work, its blank face flickering with what might have been alarm at the sudden audience. It clutched its glowing quill protectively. Makima's gaze swept over Naruto's group, lingering for a moment on Fami with a look of cool rivalry, then on Reese with the hint of a disappointed owner looking at a runaway pet. But her main focus was Naruto. "I knew you would be drawn here," Makima said, her voice echoing slightly in the stone room. "An imbalance of this nature, it's like carrion to a vulture for you, isn't it? Though I suppose a more apt metaphor would be a bug in the code for the universe's most obsessive programmer." "Your surveillance methods are improving," Naruto stated, his tone placid. "I learn from my mistakes," Makima replied smoothly. "And I've been tracking this little anomaly for some time. A devil that can rewrite reality is a prize of incalculable value. Imagine it. No more war, no more plague, no more tragedy. Not by destroying them, As the Chainsaw Man would, but by editing them out of existence. We could write a history for humanity that is free from all suffering. Her vision was so similar to the one Fami had proposed in her realm. Yet so profoundly different in its methodology. Fami wanted to erase want. Makima wanted to erase the events that caused it. Both were paths to an artificial, sterile peace. You seek to control reality by curating its story, Naruto said. But a truth that can be altered is not truth. It is propaganda. You would not be creating a better world. You would be trapping it in a comfortable lie. A comfortable lie is infinitely preferable to a painful truth, Makima countered, her smile never wavering. The ideological battle line was drawn. Yoru, unable to contain her rage, spoke through Asa. You want to use that thing to erase my history. To turn my glorious wars into footnotes and surrenders. I will tear you apart. Makima simply glanced at her. War is one of the fears I intend to erase. Little sister, your glory is an unpleasant memory humanity would be better off without. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. It was a standoff of gods and monsters in a forgotten basement. The fate of truth itself hanging in the balance. The palimpsest devil, caught between the two factions, began to shimmer with nervous energy, its inky form dripping onto the stone floor. Makima, ever the pragmatist, broke the stalemate. As much as I would enjoy this philosophical debate, that creature is still active. Its uncontrolled revisions are a threat to both our interests. It is an unstable variable that must be contained. She looked directly at Naruto, a proposition in her hypnotic, golden eyes. I propose a temporary cessation of hostilities. A tactical alliance. We can work together to corner and subdue the revision devil. Once it is contained. She left the end of the sentence hanging, the implication clear. Then we can fight over who gets to keep it. It was a devil's bargain. An alliance born of convenience and dripping with the certainty of future betrayal. But she was right. As long as the devil was free, it was a threat to everyone, its random edits capable of unmaking any of them from history with a single stroke of its quill. Naruto considered this for a moment, weighing the variables. A direct confrontation here would be chaotic. The palimpsest devil could alter the outcome of their own fight as it was happening. Containing the primary instability first was the most logical, efficient course of action. A temporary convergence of objectives is an efficient path to a stable outcome, he said, echoing his own earlier words. He inclined his head in a single, minute gesture of assent. We agree to your terms. For now, the unholy alliance was forged. Makima's serene, controlling ambition and Naruto's placid, absolute balance, turned towards a single, immediate goal. Their followers, mortal enemies just moments before, stood side by side, weapons ready, a silent, temporary truce held together by the cold, hard steel of logic. In the center of the room, the devil in the details, the creature that held the power to rewrite the world, looked from one terrifying faction to the other and finally knew the true meaning of fear. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Unholy Alliance. The silence that followed the forging of their pact. Tea was heavier than the tons of stone and paper above them. It was a silence charged with the immense, compressed energy of a cold war, a fragile truce between titans held together by the thinnest thread of mutual self-interest. The dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the stairwell seemed to move with a hesitant, fearful slowness. The palimpsest devil, the catalyst for this monstrous coalition, shivered on the spot. Its inky form dripping onto the ancient flagstones, a puddle of pure, conceptual dread forming at its feet. Makima, with the serene confidence of a queen arranging her pieces on the board, was the first to break the stillness. The objective is subdual, not destruction, she stated, her voice calm and melodic, yet it commanded the absolute attention of every being in the room. Its ability to revise reality is linked to its tools, the quill and the book. Sever its connection to those, and its influence should collapse. She turned her hypnotic, ringed gaze toward Naruto, a gesture of professional courtesy that was also a subtle challenge. I propose a coordinated, multi-vector assault. We must overwhelm its ability to process and revise threats. My assets will create a primary offensive front. Your associates can provide flanking pressure and exploit any openings. Fami let out a soft, appreciative chuckle. Her assets. She talks about you boys like your stocks in her portfolio. She murmured to no one in particular. Aki's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, his loyalty a leash Makima held with effortless grace. Naruto, his placid gaze sweeping over the cowering devil, considered her proposal a distributed denial of service attack on its cognitive revision capabilities. He translated, rephrasing her military strategy in the language of information systems. The logic is sound. However, containment must be the primary step. The variable cannot be allowed to leave the defined operational space. He looked towards the single doorway at the top of the stone steps. Without moving, he simply stated, the exit is now a conceptual paradox. To leave through it is to simultaneously desire to remain. It is no longer a functional egress. A subtle shift occurred in the air. A quiet snap of metaphysical realignment. The doorway didn't vanish or seal itself with stone. It simply stopped being an exit. It was still a hole in the wall, but its purpose, its very meaning as a way out, had been negated. Makima's eyebrow arched a fraction of an inch, a flicker of genuine surprise at the elegance and subtlety of his power. He had not built a wall. He had edited the definition of a door. Containment established, she acknowledged, a new level of respect and caution in her tone. Aki, angel, you will initiate. It was the signal. The Cold War turned hot in an instant. Aki moved first, a black blur of motion. He didn't charge in a straight line but flowed across the floor, his path unpredictable. His katana hissed from its sheath, not as a weapon of steel, but as a vessel for a far more terrible power. Curse devil, he intoned, and this time the contract flared to life. The palimpsest devil reacted, its featureless parchment face flickering with panicked equations. Its glowing quill scribbled frantically in the air, not on the book. It wasn't attacking Aki, but the concept of his weapon. As Aki swung his blade in a deadly arc, the razor-sharp edge of the katana momentarily fuzzed, the idea of sharpness becoming soft and undefined. For an instant, the sword was no more dangerous than a blade of grass. But Aki's own conviction, his sheer, focused will to kill, fought against the revision. The edge flickered back into lethal focus just as it was about to connect, the concept of his purpose momentarily stronger than the devil's edit. The blade struck the lectern, not the devil, sending splinters of ancient wood flying. Simultaneously, the angel devil drifted forward, its movements graceful and silent. It extended its arms, and from its hands, 5 spears of pure, white light materialized, each one humming with a terrifying, life-draining energy. With a flick of its wrists, the spears launched themselves at the palimpsest devil. The devil's quill danced again. The spears did not dissolve. They did not stop. They simply changed. Their lethal, humming purpose was overridden. Mid-flight, they sprouted intricate, angelic wings of golden light. Their sharp points softened into decorative finials, and their life-draining aura was replaced by a faint, pleasant scent of frankincense. They became beautiful, holy, and utterly harmless decorations, clattering to the floor around the devil-like discarded Christmas ornaments. Its revising intent, Fami called out, her voice sharp with academic excitement, her eyes wide as she analyzed the battle. It's not just changing properties, it's changing the telos of the attacks. Fascinating. Now it was Yoru's turn. A tidal wave of pure, incandescent rage surged through Asa. My turn, you plagiarizing worm. Yoru roared, her voice erupting from Asa's throat. Asa's body moved with a predatory grace that was all Yoru. She grabbed a heavy, iron-bound theology textbook from a nearby pile. Book of Righteous Wrath, she snarled, and the book twisted in her hands, its leather cover hardening, its pages fusing into a single, sharp edge, forming a heavy, brutal war axe. Ignoring all pretense of subtlety, she charged, the axe held high. She was a force of pure, primal fury, an embodiment of war's beautiful, simple directness. The palimpsest devil turned its full attention to her. Recognizing the raw, chaotic power as a significant threat, its quill became a blur, not editing her weapon, but her mind. Asa's vision flickered. For a horrifying instant, the scene changed. She was standing beside Makima, not against her. Yoru's rage was directed not at the devil, but at Naruto, who stood opposite them, a cold, sterile threat. A revised history, a manufactured memory, was trying to overwrite her reality, to turn her into Makima's ally. No, Asa screamed, her own fear and will fighting back against the intrusion. The false memory shattered, but the hesitation had cost them. The palimpsest devil flicked its inky fingers, and the very floor beneath Ace's feet was rewritten. The solid stone became a patch of thick, grasping mud. Her charge halted as she sank to her knees. The heavy axe suddenly too much to lift. This was the opening Makima had been waiting for. But before she could exploit it, a new vector of attack opened. Rize moved from the flank. She didn't run. She propelled herself in short, controlled bursts, using tiny, focused explosions at the soles of her feet to skim across the floor, ignoring the patch of mud that had trapped Asa. She was a hummingbird of destruction. Her movements too quick and erratic for the palimpsest devil to easily track. In her hands, she formed not a single, large bomb, but a swarm of tiny, buzzing spheres of explosive energy. Like a cloud of angry hornets. "It's changing your trajectory," Fami shouted, seeing the devil's quill begin to alter the laws of motion in Rize's path. "It's increasing your inertial drag." Rize adapted instantly. Instead of fighting the new, syrupy physics, she used it. She let the increased drag slow her, allowing her to make impossibly sharp turns in midair. She released her swarm of explosive hornets, which buzzed towards the devil. The devil tried to revise their explosive nature, but there were too many of them, a distributed network of tiny threats. It cool. Only negate a few before the rest were upon it. The spheres detonated, not in a single, large blast, but in a series of sharp, stinging pops against its shimmering form, causing it to recoil, its concentration broken. In that moment of chaos, Naruto acted. He had been standing still, his eyes closed, not observing the physical battle, but the flow of information beneath it, the war of competing revisions. He had felt the devil's attempt to rewrite Ace's loyalty, the change in the floor's friction, the edit of Rize's inertia. These were minor fluctuations. But now, with the devil staggered, its defenses momentarily down, he sensed its next move, a desperate, system-wide attack. It was going to try and revise the concept of enmity itself within the room, to make all its attackers suddenly, inexplicably, friends. It was an edit that would shatter the unholy alliance and end the fight in chaos. He had to stabilize the system. He took a single, quiet step forward. He did not attack. He simply became a conceptual anchor. "Truth is constant," he said, his voice not loud, but absolute. He wasn't talking to them. He was talking to reality itself. A wave of pure, conceptual stability washed through the room. The mud at Ace's feet solidified back into stone. The decorative spears on the floor dissolved back into nothingness. The unnatural drag in the air vanished. Naruto hadn't attacked the devil. He had simply hit a universal undo button, resetting all of its recent, chaotic edits and restoring the room's base reality. He was debugging the battlefield in real time. The palimpsest devil shrieked, a silent, visual screech of pure frustration as its work was effortlessly erased. It was now exposed, disoriented. "Now," Makima commanded, seizing the opportunity. She focused her full, terrifying will upon the creature. The full force of her control slammed into it. This time, it held. The devil froze, its shimmering form solidifying, its head turning mechanically towards her. It was hers. But just as a triumphant, possessive smile touched Makima's lips, the devil fought back in the only way it knew how. It couldn't edit the room anymore. Naruto's presence had locked it down. So, it turned its power inward, onto the link between itself and its new master. And it reached out, through her, to the greatest anomaly in the room. It aimed its quill at Naruto and attempted the ultimate revision. It tried to write him a history. It was not a psychic attack. It was a conceptual genesis. It tried to create a past for him where there was none. A childhood of fear, a moment of desire, a loss that could be leveraged. A single, critical vulnerability that could be used to define and control him. For an instant, it tried to revise the unwritten page, to give the void a name and a history. And it failed more spectacularly than any attack before it. The quill, the devil's instrument of ultimate power, simply dissolved. It hit Naruto's blank, balanced nature and found nothing to write on, no thread to pull. No ink that would stick. The very concept of revision, when faced with an object of absolute, eternal stasis, negated itself. It was like trying to burn a hole in a vacuum. The quill turned to a shower of black, inert dust. The devil let out a final, pathetic, silent whimper. Its power was broken. It was just a shimmering, terrified creature, now completely under Makima's control. Aki stepped forward and, with a swift, clean motion, snatched the ancient book from the lectern. The objective was complete. The truce was over. The silence that fell was 1,000 times heavier than before. The two groups faced each other over their subdued prize. The temporary alliance had dissolved, leaving only two apex predators staring at a single, irresistible meal. Makima held the now docile palimpsest devil in her telekinetic grip. She looked at Naruto, her golden eyes burning with an obsessive, feverish light. She had seen it. She had seen the ultimate defense. An existence so pure, so balanced. It could not be touched by revision itself. He was the perfect, immutable object. I was wrong about you, Makima said, her voice a soft, dangerous whisper that only he seemed to hear. A psychic communication that bypassed the others. I thought you were a rival to the Chainsaw Man. A being of erasure. She took a step closer, the air crackling around her. The others tensed, ready for the inevitable conflict. But you're so much more, her mental voice continued, dripping with a terrifying mix of awe and ambition. He erases devils so they are forgotten. But you could balance existence so that the concepts that create them, fear, war, hunger, death, never arise in the first place. You wouldn't need to kill a single devil. You could create a world where they are a conceptual impossibility. My perfect world. This was her revelation, her final, terrifying ambition, unveiled in the secret space between their minds. Not just to control the world, but to rewrite its source code. And she had just realized that Naruto was not an obstacle to her plan. He was the key. I don't want to control you anymore, Naruto, she whispered, her smile reaching its peak of serene, absolute madness. I want to merge with you. My will, my desire for a perfect world, fused with your absolute, immutable power of balance. Together, we would not be gods. We would be reality. Her proposition hung in the air, a declaration of cosmic lust so profound it dwarfed every other conflict. The fight for a single devil was meaningless. She was now playing for the ultimate prize, Naruto himself. He met her burning gaze, his own eyes as deep and calm as a frozen sea. He finally, completely, understood her system. Her final, terrible, and beautifully inefficient desire. The battle for the book was over. The war for the soul of the universe was about to begin. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Balance of All Things. The universe held its breath in the dusty, forgotten basement. Makima's proposition, a silent whisper that had traveled directly from her will to Naruto's perception, hung between them like a newly formed star, radiating a gravitational pull that warped the very fabric of the standoff. The others hadn't heard the words, but they felt the shockwave. They saw the shift in Makima's posture, the way her serene, controlling ambition had transmuted into something far more vast and terrifying, a hunger for apotheosis. Yoru was the first to react, a predator sensing a rival's ultimate gambit. Her fury, which had been a focused spear aimed at the palimpsest devil, now became a defensive shield. Asa, she's not trying to win anymore. The war devil's voice was a low, dangerous growl in Asa's mind. She's trying to consume him. This has gone beyond a simple power struggle. This is a play for the throne of reality itself. Fami's lips were parted in a silent, oh of pure, unadulterated intellectual ecstasy. Her notebook was forgotten. This was a new kind of hunger. A desire so absolute and all-consuming it made her own grand philosophy seem like a child's tantrum. She was witnessing the birth of a new cosmic appetite, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Rize, however, felt only a cold, rising dread. She instinctively took a half-step forward, positioning her body slightly in front of Naruto's. It was a futile gesture, a moth trying to shield a star from a black hole. But it was an instinct born not of programming, but of the explosive, nascent loyalty she felt in her own chest. He had given her freedom. She would not let this woman, the embodiment of control, take it away. Makima's smile was beatific, her eyes shining with the fervor of a zealot who has just seen God and decided to subsume him. She knew physical confrontation was pointless. She had to prove the righteousness of her philosophy, the benevolence of her desire. Her gaze shifted from Naruto, landing on the most damaged, most malleable variable in the room. She looked at Rize. You have suffered so much, Makima said, her voice dripping with a sympathy so pure it was corrosive. She raised a hand, not to attack, but as if to bestow a blessing. She focused her will through the cowering, captive palimpsest devil, all that pain, the training, the loneliness, the cold, a life as a tool, a weapon waiting for a signal. It was a tragedy, an ugly, inefficient story. Allow me to correct it. The palimpsest devil, under her absolute command, raised its hand, a new, shimmering quill of light forming in its inky fingers. It began to write on the air, composing a new history for Reese. Reese gasped, a jolt running through her as if she'd been struck by lightning. The cold, hard memories of KOLTSO4 began to soften. The gray concrete walls of her cell seemed to bloom with color. The cruel, dead-eyed faces of her handlers blurred, replaced by the kindly smiles of gentle teachers. The memory of the pain from her brutal combat training was being overwritten by the pleasant ache of a vigorous gymnastics class. The crushing loneliness of her existence was being replaced with a warm, fuzzy memory of camaraderie, of shared laughter with girls whose faces he couldn't quite place but whom she knew, with a sudden, unshakable certainty, had been her dearest friends. It was a violation far more intimate than any physical attack. Makima was not just trying to control her. She was trying to steal her pain, to rob her of the very history that had forged her. See, Makima's voice was a gentle, seductive lullaby. No more suffering, no more bombs, just a happy girl with a happy life. This is the peace I offer. A better story. For a terrible moment, Reese felt herself succumbing. The new memories were so warm, so pleasant. The release from the weight of her past was a temptation unlike any other. It would be so easy to let go, to accept this gift, this comfortable lie. But then, a single, sharp memory pierced through the comforting fog, a memory of her own making. The taste of cheap ramen in Shinjuku. The awkward kindness in Ace's eyes. The brilliant, explosive joy of her symphony of light over Leon. And the feeling of Naruto's lips, a choice that was chaotic, inefficient, and entirely, beautifully, hers. Those memories were real, they were earned, and they were only meaningful because of the gray, painful reality that had preceded them. Our suffering was the dark soil from which her new, fragile freedom had grown. To erase it would be to kill the flower. No, Reese whispered, the word a tiny spark of defiance. Her hands clenched into fists. My life, my real life, it wasn't a story for you to edit. She looked at Makima, her green eyes blazing with a newfound fire, a fire that was not the heat of a bomb, but the burning conviction of a soul claiming its own narrative. It was mine, she said, her voice growing stronger. The pain was mine, the choice was mine, and you can't have it. With a scream of pure, concentrated will, she fought back. She focused on the truth of her past, the cold, the loneliness, the agony. She embraced it, owned it, and used its jagged, painful reality as a shield. The false, warm memories shatter. Against the brutal truth of her own accepted history. The palimpsest devil recoiled as if burned, its quill of light flickering and dying. Reese had won her first conceptual battle, not with an explosion, but with an act of radical self-acceptance. Makima's smile tightened by an infinitesimal degree. Her benevolent demonstration had been rejected. The flaw in her logic had been exposed. You cannot save someone who does not wish to be saved from their own truth. Fine. If they would not accept her gifts, she would force them to see her logic. Her focus shifted, her control over the palimpsest devil becoming a scalpel. She targeted the very foundations of their resistance. Fami felt it first, a subtle, insidious twisting of her own nature. Her intellectual hunger, her desire to understand Naruto, was suddenly gone. In its place was a new, overwhelming craving. A hunger for certainty, for a single, absolute, final truth that would end all questions. Her ringed eyes glazed over as she looked at Makima, seeing not a rival, but the source of the ultimate satiety she now craved. Makima's vision of a perfect world was no longer a theory to be debated, it was the meal that would end all hunger. Then, the revision hit Yoru. The glorious, beautiful concept of war, of struggle as the engine of creation, began to curdle in her mind. The memory of her victory in the valley, the thrill of her own power, was rewritten. She now saw it as a pointless, messy, inefficient expenditure of energy. The new truth, blooming in her mind with the force of a divine revelation, was that the only victor. Why worth achieving was the cessation of all conflict. Peace. Absolute, eternal, sterile peace. Makima's peace. Asa. She's right. Yoru's voice echoed in Asa's mind, but it was a different voice, hollowed out. Stripped of all its fire and passion. The struggle is the flaw. We must help her. We must end it. For good. Yoru. No. Asa screamed internally, fighting a war on two fronts. She felt her own arm, guided by Yoru's new, placid conviction, begin to raise the axe of righteous wrath, not to attack Makima, but to defend her. The alliance was broken. The team was turning on itself, their core natures hijacked and overridden. Reese looked on in horror, her personal victory turning to ash in her mouth as her friends succumbed to the enemy's logic. This was the ultimate imbalance. A single, dominant will imposing a false, uniform reality upon other, independent systems. It was the philosophical antithesis of everything Naruto represented. He had stood silent through it all, a placid eye in a conceptual hurricane. He had watched Rise's struggle, Fami's conversion, Yoru's corruption. He had processed the data. He understood the attack, and now, he would correct the system. He took a step forward, into the center of the room. He did not look at Makima. He did not look at the palimpsest devil. He looked at the two objects at the heart of the conflict, the ancient, skin-bound book of recorded history, and the terrified devil that revised it. Memory and revision, truth and falsehood. A system in conflict with itself cannot achieve equilibrium, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos, reaching not just their ears, but their very souls. Asa felt Yoru's placid conviction waver. Fami's hunger for certainty faltered. His words were a dose of pure, undiluted reality. He raised his hands, palms open. One aimed at the book, the other at the devil. Your solution, Makima, is to destroy one variable to privilege the other. To erase pain, to erase struggle, to erase truth. You seek a universe of only positive integers. It is an unbalanced equation. He looked at Yoru and Fami. Your existence is predicated on the opposite pole. War, hunger, a universe of only negative integers. Also an unbalanced equation. The solution is not to choose one side, he declared. It is to recognize that both are essential components of a single, functional system. And then, he brought his hands together in a slow, deliberate clap. The sound was not a clap. It was the sound of a universe turning a page. A force of pure, conceptual gravity erupted from him. The palimpsest devil was torn from Makima's control, flying through the air not as a creature, but as a stream of pure, inky idea. The ancient book flew from Aki's hands, its pages fluttering, releasing a cloud of golden, shimmering data, the memories, truths, and histories it contained. The two streams, the black ink of revision and the golden light of the record, met in the space between Naruto's hands. They did not collide. They did not annihilate each other. They wove together. They began to merge, to braid themselves into a new, single entity. It was an act of cosmic synthesis, a fusion of two opposing, absolute concepts. The form that coalesced was a new book, larger than the first. Its cover was neither skin nor paper, but a smooth, gray material that seemed to shift between all possible textures. On its cover, a single, glowing symbol appeared. A perfect circle, half black, half white, with a dot of the opposite color in each hemisphere. The symbol of perfect, dynamic equilibrium. The book hovered in the air for a moment, radiating a profound, absolute silence. It was not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of a library that contained every story, every truth, every lie, every possibility, all held in a perfect, non-judgmental, stable state. The palimpsest devil was gone. The book of history was gone. In their place was this new artifact. The archive. The moment it formed, its power washed over the room. Fami's manufactured hunger for certainty vanished, replaced by her own, familiar, insatiable curiosity, but now it was directed at the book, which represented all the knowledge she could ever desire. Perfectly catalogued and forever balanced. Yoru's placid desire for peace evaporated, and her own fiery nature returned, but it was tempered. She could feel the truth of her glorious, bloody wars within the archive. But she could also feel the truth of the peace that followed them. They were not opposites. They were part of the same grand, historical rhythm. The conflict within her was resolved. Makima stared at the hovering book, her face a mask of utter, profound disbelief. She had sought to wield the ultimate weapon of revision, to bend truth to her will. Naruto had taken that weapon, fused it with its opposite, and created an object of perfect, immutable objectivity. He had not destroyed her tool. He had elevated it to a state beyond her control, beyond anyone's control. It was no longer a weapon to be wielded. It was a fundamental constant of the universe, a silent testament to the fact that all stories, true and false, were part of the same whole. She had lost. She had not been beaten. She had not been overpowered. She had been balanced. Her entire philosophy, her grand, benevolent, tyrannical ambition, had been neatly and perfectly refuted by a higher, more elegant logic. Her control over her own assets vanished as her concentration broke. Aki stood free, looking confused. The angel devil folded its wings, becoming passive once more. Makima looked at Naruto, and for the first time, there was no guile in her eyes, no ambition, no desire for control. There was only the vast, empty, and terrifying abyss of a being who has just witnessed a power so far beyond her comprehension that it had redefined the very meaning of the word. Her obsession had not been sated. It had been rendered meaningless. Naruto lowered his hands. The archive floated gently down, landing on the ornate lectern with a soft, final thud. Its purpose was fulfilled. Its system was stable. He turned to his companions. The imbalance is corrected. Then, he began to walk towards the doorway he had sealed. The others, Asa, a shell-shocked but whole Yoru, a humbled and thoughtful Fami, a quiet and resolute Rize, falling into step behind him. As he approached the exit, its conceptual paradox dissolved. Its meaning as a door seamlessly restored. Makima did not try to stop them. She simply watched him go. She watched the one being in all of creation who could have given her the perfect world she craved, and who had, in a single, quiet act, shown her that her definition of perfect was the ultimate flaw. As Naruto and his entourage stepped out of the library's dusty basement and into the cool, gray light of the Oxford morning, the chapter was over. The unholy alliance was broken. The battle for truth had been won not with a victory, but with a synthesis. They had faced their gray test challenger yet and had emerged not just intact, but stronger, their own internal systems tested and rebalanced by the conflict. A new day was dawning, and somewhere behind them, in the silence of the city, their most powerful enemy was quietly, completely, and terrifyingly re-evaluating her entire understanding of the world. Chapter 10 End. The End. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.